Move on to the fire procedure. So the fire drill is not expected to be alarmed. The alarm sounds, please evacuate the building quickly and calmly. Please use the stairs, do not use the lift, and we'll gather outside the Yorkshire Bank on the opposite side of the road and exit the room by the door you came in by. If you need any assistance, please make yourself known to a member of staff. It's time to remind members to turn your phones off or set them to silent, please. And I'll also advise that all parts of the meeting will be recorded for future broadcast. Move on to apologies.
We've had apologies from Councillor Margrave with substitute Councillor Watkins, and Tracy Shepherd substituted by Councillor Phillips, Caroline Phillips.
Chair, apologies, I'll have to go at 5:45.
Agree the minutes on the 22nd of February 2018. Mr. Cashman, stand as a true record. On to declarations of interest. Any member that needs to declare declaration of interest that isn't already on the agenda? I've got a declaration of interest because Mary House, being a member of the management committee with mental health dropping, and somehow dropped off the declarations of interest for myself. The mental health dropping. It's I'm on the management committee. It is on my declaration of interest, but since it fell off the agenda. And also I need to declare the whip in regard to the work programme item. Move on to public consultation.
Chair, I think that will be general, well, to declare that item has been through full council, so I need to declare the whip on it.
Is there any other members then?
I was probably new to as well.
No.
Are we speaking of the issue that's been raised regarding the
It's
merging of the two committees?
It's declaration of interest in regard, and I've declared as Councillor Hancock's house and Councillor Phillips
Item 14.
in regard to item 14. Public consultation. I've been informed that we have got members of the public wishing to speak on each of the items. Obviously, we'll speak after the presentation. And we move on to item 6, the JSNA, public health update.
Thank you. So I've been asked to update on two things, just to give first of all a bit of an update on where we're at with the JSNA, and the second bit is just to give a general public health update on some of the big issues that have been happening in public health at the moment. In terms of the Joint Strategic Needs Assessment, obviously the Joint Strategic Needs Assessment is really there to provide a comprehensive and single source of information and intelligence and assets in an area. The strategic requirement is that we do that at a Warwickshire level, and over the last few years, historically, that's what we've done in Warwickshire. We've done that at a Warwickshire level. We've undertaken a series of theme-based JSNAs based upon what was identified as the priorities. So there's been issues around mental health, around carers, around some of the long-term conditions that have been included in a theme-based Joint Strategic Needs Assessment approach. Where possible, that's drilled down to a local level, and that's being used to inform then the planning and commissioning of services. I think what we recognised in going through that process is whilst that's very useful and we identified some key issues across the county, and we tried where possible to get local information, that we kind of lost a bit of the sense of place in that as well. And I think so over the last year we've been working really hard with all of our partners to try and have a more local approach to understand the needs of our population, and that's really where we've been working, as I said, over the last year. I think in recognising that we need to focus on smaller geographies and really understand in detail what the issues are in those geographies, and bring together a whole range of information, data, intelligence, assets and stakeholders in that area to really understand what are the big issues that we need to address in there, so that that can then inform our planning, and we can have, I guess it's about having one single source of truth and information that we can all work from. And also in undertaking that process, I think we recognise that that in itself will be a way of engaging with our local populations and being able to have conversations about how we do some of that planning. So over the last year, we've been working towards moving our joint strategic needs assessment from this theme-based approach and looking at priorities across the whole county to working at a place-based approach. And there's 3 ways that we've done that. The first thing that we had to do was agree what the geographies were that we would look at. There's obviously a huge amount of geographies that we could look at, from wards, super output areas as we call them. We could look at boroughs, we could, you can cut the geographies in so many different ways. And after lots of consultation, 22 geographies have been agreed across Warwickshire. None of them are a perfect fit, and I think we would acknowledge that, but we've tried to make it the best fit we could to meet the requirements of both health partners, local authority partners, and wherever possible, the third sector as well. The idea being that it's what we can get, data is available, a kind of pragmatic approach, but also that we could use it as a building block approach, if you like. So we could take the smallest geographies we've got and try and build them into other geographies, and in doing so, hopefully there's geographies that mean something to different people. So we've got 22 across the county, and that they've been signed off and agreed in July. The second, and sorry, I should say that all of this, whilst it's a strategic needs assessment and it should be owned by all partners, the place that it sits is under the Health and Wellbeing Board, and so that's where we've taken all of the information at a county level. But we have tried to, wherever possible, have local conversations with partners through the Health and Wellbeing Board, but then through other various committees and groups. The second phase is then recognising that actually this is a 2-year programme and people would want information as soon as possible. The Insight team at the County Council spent quite a lot of time developing a profile tool, and that's basically an Excel. It contains a huge amount of information in there, information on the sort of demography and the population itself, but also information on education, crime, health. What we've done in there is it's been quite pragmatic. A lot of that information is available routinely, and we've tried to pull that in. But there's information there across all the geographies that people can start using straight away, and it's been genuinely well received. There is some work we need to do to put more information into that, and basically it's as good as the information we can get and we can put into it. So that's all been signed off, and that went in September. That work was completed. So the phase that we're moving into now, and that was I hope to talk to you about now, is around phase 3 of the process, and that's when we actually start doing the detailed needs assessments at a local level. Whilst we've been developing the tool and trying to agree the geographies, we have undertaken a piece of work in Atherstone to try and work through how we can do this practically. So we've undertaken a detailed place-based geography in the Atherstone and Manchester area, where we've gone out, undertaken a big data trawl, spoken to all our local stakeholders, got people together and collected all their information and tried to present that back in a report to people and discuss some of that information, the key issues that are coming out in that local area. And we did that through the Insight team, pulled together a report. We took that to a stakeholder event where we talked to people, worked in smaller groups on some of the key themes that were coming out, and started to develop some recommendations. We then refined that and brought that back to partners virtually and those who were able to attend to agree these recommendations going forward and key areas to focus. And as a result of that, we've got small numbers of projects that are already ongoing, and other work that we will use that information to then influence other programmes of work. So one of the examples that we've got is that locally, as you'll hear about later, we've obviously got a big teenage pregnancy problem in Atherstone, as we have in Nuneaton. That wasn't recognised in some of the borough level figures, but once we drilled down to Atherstone, we knew we had an issue. So we've used the intelligence from that to help develop a health store, which we have in Nuneaton. That's now been commissioned also at Atherstone. That work was ongoing through the process, but we've been able to target some of the other services we would want to put there alongside the sexual health services for young people based on the information that we were getting and the conversations that we were having with local partners. So there's some practical examples of the work that's coming out, and we can shape some of the planning around our services. So back to phase 3. Through the Health and Wellbeing Board in January, we agreed that we would start to roll out geographies across the county. They'll be done in 4 chunks, so we're hoping that will take 6 months at a time. The first chunk and the first wave that's been agreed is within your paper, and that in Nuneaton it's been agreed that Nuneaton Central is where we would start our focus, and that's because obviously particularly the levels of deprivation. And so basically, starting hopefully from April, though conversations have started already, we'll start that process of engaging with stakeholders and to begin to pull together information intelligence locally that we can then present back to partners and say, and to look at, to develop together some of the key issues that are emerging that we can use as the basis of conversations and planning. For Nuneaton Central, as I'm sure you know, at the Health and Wellbeing Board, it was agreed that Kath Kelly would be the sponsor for that programme, but that the Borough Council will be certainly involved in telling us what information you had in the knowledge of the local area. We recognise within each area there's a huge amount of information already. Every area is completely different. We haven't set a standard form. We've got templates and ways that we would want to work, but there's no standard set within each area. It will be very much governed by how people want to do things in their own area. If there's a lot of groups already established, if there's a lot of work, so I know there's recently a big event in Nuneaton where people discuss some of the big needs and issues in the area, absolutely that needs to be fed in. There's no point in duplicating. And the whole point of having a group of people who are key stakeholders just to tell us what we should do within that area and how they want it to be developed in that area and what's going to be the most benefit within this area. It's not about dictating anything, it's about how we work together to make sure that we've got that one source of the truth, all the information is pulled together that all different stakeholders can then use in their planning, we're using that information, and that we can then keep that up to date. One of the things that we'll do is put together a web page for each area so that we can share that information, that we're as transparent as possible about where the information is coming from and what we're getting. In terms of the GSNA, I mean, that's the point we've really got to. So I'm happy to take any questions if you wanted me to stop on the GSNA now. I realise I probably talk very fast.
I've got a public consultation. Mrs. Condicle.
Thank you. I mean, I think it's quite good that it is actually becoming now, you know, more place-based and things. I mean, my one concern is really how communication actually goes out, and that applies to absolutely everything that's actually on the agenda, because there's so much good stuff and information and things, but half the time you speak to people on the street and they haven't, oh, we need this, that and the other and things, and well, actually that is already going on and things, and I don't know what the answer is, because it, you know, it is a problem that's been around for quite a long time on all the things. Also, sort of some of the things that say here on the emerging recommendations from Atherstone. Now, obviously, you say each area is different, and I appreciate that and things, but there's an awful lot that I see on there that I think that's going to be the same, certainly around our area, you know, in Nuneaton and Bedworth. So I'd like to sort of know how much you are sort of taking forward, so we're not sort of repeating stuff, but just building in each area on what's, you know, come out, because there are going to be a lot of common themes.
So taking the first point around communication and engagement, I mean that's absolutely really important. I think one of the things that I've fed back is that we need to think about, because, well, first of all, GSNA doesn't sound very interesting at all. So, you know, we know what we're talking about, but nobody else will necessarily. So there's something we need to do to make that interesting to people, to make people want to be involved in the process. So, and I think again that will probably depend on each area. In some areas we may not even necessarily talk about the GSNA. We'll just go and talk to different groups and try and pull that information in. And so it will vary. I think that's one of the reasons we talked about the website as well. And the idea is to use existing groups and stakeholders to try and get those messages out. I mean, really it's about us championing it and selling it, and that was part of the reason for having a sponsor. It's people saying, actually this is a really good thing and useful thing to do, and that we're going to buy into this, because there's no point in us spending all this time producing all these recommendations if people don't, if there's no point and people aren't going to do anything with them. So we've spent a lot of time I think we're trying to engage with all our partners so that everybody owns it, because it's not something that I want to be doing to people, or the county council want to do to people, or the CCG want to do. It's got to be everybody's, and that's why it's got to be localised. So I think in terms of engagement and communications, we need to localise it. We will do everything we've got with the resources we've got in terms of pushing out messages, using the communication channels that are already there, and hopefully, but the big point of doing this as well is around the engagement, so that people become involved in it, and it's hopefully it will become that it becomes an organ in itself. It will keep going, and that's so we will have the separate pages. We're going to come up with some words, and hopefully we'll do that through the local groups about how will this actually get people interested and build on what's already there as well. So that's some, and I guess I'm hopefully seeking everybody's support in talking to local communities about that. In terms of the different the themes, as you mentioned, I think the recognition, and I didn't touch on it in much detail, but is actually that what we will end up with is some themes that will be very local, some themes that will be perhaps in a larger footprint, but will still need to be localised in the way they're delivered, some that will be probably even county-wide or maybe CCG-wide, some that may even actually need to be fed up to sub-regional levels or higher. So there's some things that will, so end-of-life care or teenage pregnancy. So teenage pregnancy is a good example. It's probably something that needs to be done in a CCG footprint, because actually it's mainly Nuneaton and Bedworth and North Warwickshire we're talking about, but it's actually particularly Atherstone and parts of Nuneaton that it's particularly, that it will be much more of a priority in. But actually the rest of the county aren't probably going to have the same level of interest, whereas end-of-life care, there's a lot of things that actually are the whole county is interested in, but again there's some local delivery that has to happen. So some of the pilots around compassionate communities will have to happen in very small communities. So I think it will be, what we'll do is as we develop, we're going to stop at each phase and each wave and see, look at the learning come out of it and see what are the common themes that we're getting and that we need to take back and do with different geographies, and what are the really local themes, and that's where we're hoping to get local buy-in. That answers.
Thank you.
Councillor Hancock.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. There's a real opportunity presented to us here to address some of the issues around our area. But through you, Chair, I have to say to Rachel, I'm extremely concerned that Bedworth hasn't been included in this. And certainly the central area of Bedworth and the Bede ward that I represent seems to touch upon all the necessary criteria to qualify for this. I also accept, Chair, there's limitations on budgets, and you can only do so much at any one time. It doesn't change my view on my concerns that Bedworth has been left out of this equation again. However, it has been. So what I would be seeking is reassurances that when this programme is rolled out, it continues to identify areas of multiple deprivation, which Bede ward is one of those, and that the schemes are expanded into Bedworth as well as the other areas. It's an interesting equation. We're meant to be one borough with two towns membership. Yet again, we've only got a certain, the Nuneaton area being addressed for need, and Bedworth seemingly put to one side again. Thanks, Chair.
I completely take your point. Obviously, we've got 22 geographies, and the plan is to cover all of those geographies. So hopefully, but whether it'll happen by September, we'll be able to then move on to the next phase. And so I'd be happy to put, and obviously through this committee as well, to put forward Bedworth as the second area that you wanted to focus on. We're very happy to have, the approach that we took was to take Nuneaton central because it was the highest area of deprivation. Very happy to be guided, and all, we are very happy to come where in the order that you feel that they should be tackled. So the other areas of Nuneaton will be covered in over the next 2 years. If you feel that Bedworth and the group feels that Bedworth is the one to put forward, as long as we've got support and sponsorship, we're very happy to do that. So
I do, Chair.
Councillor Finn.
Thank you. I just want to ask you, Rachel, how do we make sure, it's Bill touched on it, we've identified the problems, how do you make sure that the money goes to those problems? Because it's only a year ago that the Health Star was shutting down, and we had to fight to keep it going in the midst of a teenage pregnancy epidemic.
And I mean, in answer to that, I mean, my background's information and intelligence, so I think having the evidence, and that's why it's so important to have this evidence and information in one source of information as well, is what's crucial to making those arguments to keep things open, or to put services and invest services in a certain area. As I said already, as part of the health store, when we were looking at that and lobbying to keep the health store open and trying to find money for it, we used the information, and much of it's in this document, and to keep it going, but also to extend it to Atherstone, because there was no point in just doing it there when Atherstone actually is one of the highest wards in the country. So we've already used the information to try and shape the direction of the services and the funding. I mean, obviously the challenge is trying to balance all of those once we've got a huge number of these and we're trying to balance the competing priorities. But that's what the JSNA was set up to do. It was supposed to be there so we could bring all of that together and use it to direct commissioners. I mean, another example is with some of the work that's happening, for example, around the CAMS service. So because we now know that we've got very high levels of children in Atherstone as well as Nuneaton who have got with issues around self-harm, and we can already start to speak to the service and say, actually, and we have had conversations when we look to set up hubs, that would be a prime area if we can do it, that we would look to do that because we know we've got a need there. So those conversations have already started on the basis of some of the information. So it's not necessarily about putting a new investment in as it was with the health store. It could just be about how we shift some of that focus. Out of hospital services are all being redesigned at the moment. They're developing hubs, and this is a prime way of, again, this was part of the work that should support them, because they should be able to look at what's in here and the information that's in here, and if we've got high levels of long-term conditions in a particular population, then actually certain services, when you've got limited resources and you haven't got enough staff to go in every area, then they should be in those areas where they've got those needs. So that's exactly what we're trying to use it for. So hopefully I can reassure you that we can't do everything, but at least we've got the information. And when opportunities become available, we've got that information there as well to say this is what we're basing it on.
Councillor Constable.
Yeah, a couple quick points. First, Nuneaton Central is poorly defined. And obviously you mentioned here about 25,000 as being the population size for these areas. Is Nuneaton Central covering out to Camp Hill, Barpool, that way, or is it just Abbey and Wenbrook? Is the sort of quick question.
Yeah.
And the second one is, I mean, lots of the issues we have are around poor diet, people not knowing how to cook, people living their lives on takeaway food, and you look how many takeaway food places. So it does need to feed into all sorts of things like planning, policy, and also getting, I mean, there's been a lot of good stuff done with some of these classes teaching people how to cook and whatever, but it needs to be scaled up many times because that opportunity is being missed. And it's actually a very good town to actually cook your own food and have a healthy lifestyle, because we've got the market, we've got lots of access to food. It's not like you live in a city where there isn't actually a lot of the tools. It's a lot of it's the education to actually live a healthier lifestyle.
On your first point, unfortunately I didn't have the map to send out which shows the areas that it covers, so when I sent the papers out, I do have that now, so I'm going to ask if that's okay if I can circulate that round. I printed it out and it's not printed very well on my print because unfortunately I was at home. I can pass it around so you can see the area, but yes, Camp Hill will be separately covered and looked at. So they're quite, some of them are quite small geographies, some of the North Warwickshire ones are quite large, for example. It depends on the population size. So we will be covering those in different times and different waves, and those common themes again will be picked up. So I'll circulate the map so you can see and get us any comments back on that. Absolutely, it needs to feed into all of the... I think there's two things in what you said. The first thing is there's lots of assets locally that we actually miss in the way that we collect information and intelligence, and we need that for planning. So all of the good things that are going on, we need to try and capture in this process, but we do absolutely use it to feed into all of the other planning and the other documents.
They just come back on that localities. It's not just Camp Hill. We've got massive amounts of deprived wards. Barpool, Stockingford. Yeah, I think it's Queenswood, isn't it? It's called Queenswood. But yeah, there's a mass of areas out there. So if we're doing a follow-on study, we don't just want to then do one more ward, because I say there is so much to do.
Sorry, so there's a large map. The whole of Warwickshire will be covered, and it's just been chunked up into these different geographies. Within each geography, there may be several locations within that. So when we say we're not limiting ourselves to what we'll do in those geographies, again, it's going to be very much led by the area. I'm using North Warwickshire as an example just because it's so dispersed, but we recognise we're not going to do one event there. We're going to actually, because the next wave is effectively covering most of the rural of North Warwickshire, so we're going to have to do several different events looking at different communities within that. So hopefully you'll get that local focus as well as getting the wider focus, but the whole of Warwickshire and the whole of Nuneaton and Bedworth will be covered, and have all of these place-based needs assessment undertaken by the end of 2 years. That's what our ambition is. So every area should be covered, but it'll be really key to have your input into how we localise that within the geography. So when I send the map round, if you say, well actually, Hilltop, we need to do that, we need to do a piece of work, there's already a lot being done, Lincoln's big local, do some local work, but we'll also need to do a piece here, but that's very different. You may tell us that we have to do 4 or 5 things there, then we'll just have to work through that together. That's why that local knowledge and insight is so important. It's not about coming and doing something. So I'm not sure if that explained very well. Apologies about the map, because that would have really, really helped.
No, Councillor Watkins.
Oh, I've got several points here. On your priorities, I'm taking it that these are your priorities that are over on your 5 priorities. Vulnerable young people, mental well-being, are they main priorities?
They were the priorities in the previous, so when we did theme-based ones, they were the
Right, which will bring me on to another question really, is if they're your priorities for the previous 5 years, previous 5 years to that, so 10 years ago, would have been pretty much these 5 again, I would imagine, or it was the last time I asked. So are these your 5 priorities for the coming 5 years? Or?
No, I mean they will be picked, because they're still going to be they're going to be big issues, and they're likely to be probably a lot of the county-wide issues. They'll be picked up in the needs assessments, but there will probably be other priorities within each area, and that's the reason we're doing it locally. Because so in Atherstone, although many of those were issues, it's not some of the big themes that came out. So teenage pregnancy wasn't picked up in there, end of life wasn't picked up in there. So there will be other things that come out when you start to look at a local level.
Yeah, see, the point I'm trying to make is, for 10 to 15 years, these have been priorities, and we've been ploughing money into them and education and all the rest of it, and they're still priorities. Also, because I actually do like JSNA, and I just wish we could get everybody to look at it before they decide things, but we can't. I mean, we can do that at the borough, but the problem for us mainly is at the county. So how can we get planners at the county to look at this JSNA and take it seriously? Because when the plans go in to build new houses and things like that, we've still got the 2 air quality issues within the Nuneaton, which is Midland Road and Leicester Road. Planners in Warwick County could never have looked at this JSNA, or else they would have put something in place to have got rid of them 2 air quality areas. That's just one point. How do you get the planners at the county to take this seriously and to take it as a living document, something they need to do something about? The other bit is about withdrawing services. I know this is not your fault. It is your problem, but it's not your fault. And we've got something here that's changing on the drug and alcohol services. We've obviously got within this borough a problem with drug and alcohol, and then that's why we've got services here. I would also like to see in there drug, alcohol and gambling addiction, because you will see on the work programme that we have got gambling addiction, because drug, alcohol, gambling is all pretty much connected, really. And if anybody has got a gambling problem, they have to go to Coventry. Well, they can't go to Coventry because they can't afford it, because they're gambling anyway. And so there's things that need to be linked up and put into this document. On the small projects, is there anything? Can you expand on that a little bit, on what small projects you've got going? And that's me really.
So if I just try and I think, so your point on, I suppose, on air quality and other partners taking it seriously. I mean, as much as, I'm obviously very passionate about the JSNA, we've been involved in it for a long time. And I think whilst strategically people have used it to look at the key themes and prioritise at a CCG and at a county level and locally, that always, as you're right, not necessarily everybody takes account of it, nor do, and why is that even relevant to me? So I think we've always had the pushback and challenge, and that's part of the thing we've tried to address through scrutiny to say, have you looked at what these documents say? So that's part of us, I guess, trying to lobby for it. But I think the difference with moving to this approach is that people actually are a lot more bought into it, and a lot more people are actually waiting for it now and saying, right, you know, we need this because this needs to inform the services we plan. And I think you're right, we do need to use it to then push back and say, no, this tells us some of that local things, because air quality wouldn't have necessarily been picked up in the previous way that we have run it, but actually it was something that we did look at in Atherstone, for example. So, and if it comes out as a big theme in some of the local areas, it won't be because it's not an issue that's across all areas. So often it's one of those things that gets dropped off, but when you come into the local issues, if that's one of the big things that's an issue here or in Warwick, for example, then that's where it will be picked up and then it can be fed back in. And again, it's for us then to say, these are some of the issues that are coming out, and planners need to take account of it, or transport needs to take account of this, or education. So I'm hoping that through this new process that we will be able to hold people to account a little bit more, but also get some of those issues that may have fallen through in the past to raise up the agenda, I guess.
I just wanted to follow up on that point, because my view and probably Chris's is that health needs should be reflected in all aspects of what councils do. And Chris is dead right, planning and highways and everything, if we could get those linked up with health, things would improve so much. But how are we how can we get people at county, the planners and so on, to take health seriously when they've never done so in the past? I mean, we've got, like Chris said, loads of air quality places, and we just feel like we've been trying to get a meeting for ages, haven't we, Chris?
Well, I've been trying.
For something that will address air quality on Midland Road and Central Avenue, and it's just not happening.
I mean, so certainly in terms, I mean, we strongly advocate health impact assessments undertake those on planning, on policies, to make sure that people consider some of the health impacts of any plans or policies that are going to be put in place. And I think some of the data in this will help us to be able to do some of that as well. So, you know, we are that's one of the benefits of doing this and pulling that information in. There will be more information available to support some of the health impact assessments on policies as well. So,
do you talk to other departments though at the county council?
We do. And we strongly try and advocate that health has an impact. So, you know, at the moment I know that we're involved in looking at some of the planning, and not just around health centres, but trying to think on some of the housing developments and get, whilst people have to do environmental impact assessments, they don't necessarily have to do a health impact assessment. So we're trying to lobby to say, well, actually health is important, and it's about looking at positives and negatives, and some of the information in this is really important to help that case. So yeah, we do try and lobby. We are trying to support that, and as I said, hopefully the profile of this and the detail of this will help people to understand how they are linked as well.
Just
There's a couple of questions.
yeah, there was a couple of questions, yeah, but just to come on, like the cancer and the cardiovascular, for instance. Now that's been a problem here for years. It's well known that we die younger of cardiovascular, cancer, obesity within this borough. And one of the main reasons, especially within the Neaton, it's not so bad within Edward, is we were divided by a train line, and we've got 2 bridges over it. And we cannot get the planners to put another bridge over because there's suicide attempts off bridges and this and that and all different things. But they will not take us seriously about putting a bridge over a railway line. So how can we make them take this into account, take the cancer, take the cardiovascular, take the air qualities into account out of this report and take it seriously for the health of a borough?
It's just to clarify, Chris is on about this air quality place. there's an area of congestion that goes from, sorry to go on about this, Chair, but it can back up from Tuttle Hill right up to the Crown in the middle of town, and we've been trying to get, what we'd like is some sort of a shortcut cutting through between Judkins and Weddington.
Northern Link Road.
Yeah. Northern Link Road. And
We just cannot get the meeting.
Can't get a meeting. Can't get people to meet us.
I mean, certainly, I can take some of this back. You know, I'm happy to try and have some conversations certainly about the air quality to pick that up. I don't know. I haven't been involved in it, but I've got colleagues who are, so I can try and speak to people about that and see what conversations have already been had and what more we can do. And yeah, if you've got any information on the planning side, if there's anything we can do. I mean, as I said, we won't fix everything, but we can certainly try and just about make it. And that's one of the things we're trying to do is link some of this up. So.
Well, I think the important thing is, like I say, we can make our planners to look at it, because we can take this document in and say, right, have you considered this? But we can't make your planners a county take it seriously. And there's got to be somewhere where they must prioritise it.
Well, as I said, it is the county council have signed up. They put an awful lot of resource into it, and it's our job to try and make sure that they do take account of it. And I'm optimistic at this point that this new approach is going to be more relevant to people. And I think so. It is our job to make sure that people take account of it. And as you're right, it's not just the health or the localities team within, or the insight team within the county. It should be all of us that look at and understand the relevance. I think because it's often health and well-being, people think that's not me, but that's, you know, we do strong trying to, and things like the health impact assessments, that all helps. So.
Well, it doesn't matter how pretty your borough is, if everybody's dying out there, it's no good, is it? So, and on the small projects, can you?
I think it was just that, so some, obviously there's some local, we've got, for example, different partnerships and local groups, and through some of the things that are coming out of the data that's coming out of here, we would hope that we'd use that to shape some of the local work that we want to do. I'll come back to Atherstone just because it was the pilot. So the compassionate community work is something that we're going to start in Atherstone. It was something that was being talked about anyway, but we know end of life care was an issue. People had died, more people were, obviously it's the same in the parts of Nuneaton, but people are dying in hospital. More people are dying in hospitals where they haven't got a choice, they would like to come out of hospital. And there's an initiative called Compassionate Communities, which is about trying to make the whole community understand what dying well is, and to be able to support people to live in their communities if they want to stay in their communities sort of when they're in end of life, and just about giving people training and skills and knowledge. And there's a whole load of different things you can do depending on the community. And again, using some of this information, we were able to have conversations with people and use that to direct and ensure that we're going to have a small pilot in Atherstone to start with if it works. It's actually Nuneaton that we're hoping to do something in next, but again, it will depend on, I think it will depend on some of the data that's coming out of these and where we need to put that service. The other thing you talked about cancer and heart disease. Obviously we've got our #OneThing campaign, which is about getting people to change and have healthy lifestyles. That's been extended from just being cardiovascular disease to trying to talk about risks around cancer and CBD. Cancer screening has been linked into that. And again, because particular parts of Atherstone had hotspots, although the campaign is across Nuneaton in bed with Rugby and North Warwickshire, we're able to put extra resources and extra sessions into some of those areas. So if we know that there's a particular area, so we know we've put a lot of resources into, for example, the mosques here to try and get people. So again, we can use that to target some of the projects and develop new projects. Some will go bigger and sustainable, some might just stay small and local and be a one-off piece of work because there's a gap being identified. So there's lots of little things that are coming out. We need to do more to understand loneliness in a particular community, so we're going to go and do just quite a brief project to go in and do some more sort of one-off surveys and things and try and understand that, and then put some bingo clubs or whatever we need to put in there, and that will not be just us doing it, but we'll bring in other third sector and localities team and others to do that.
I think one useful piece of data would be really localised life expectancy, infant mortality data to really pull out where we have major health issues. I totally disagree with Chris that big £60 million bypasses are the way to solve these health impacts. And actually a lot of the active travel, better diet, etc.
60 million, no one's mentioned 60 million. You're only talking about a mile of road.
The Rugby Relief Road costs 60
We're
million. So
digressing here.
But we're not talking about the
Councillors-
Rugby Relief Road. We're
Councillors-
talking about a little shortcut of
Councillor
about a
Phillips.
mile. Apologies, Chair.
Go on, go
right, yeah. Having life expectancy data around the town to actually see where we've got the issues, not just with how long people live, but all the infant mortality. So we actually can have a heat map effectively of where there's problems. And actually, yeah, the next topic we're talking about, 60 suicides a year in Warwickshire. Yeah, there's lots of things where we need to be actually looking at where there is avoidable deaths and where we can make the biggest impact. And big ticket items are very expensive, but a lot of the lifestyle changes, the active travel, yeah, I mean, in terms of getting people healthier, I love Stockingford Station, because if you're a railway station, people walk to the station. It's actually trying to do all the good stuff and changing people's lifestyle, because building more roads just makes people drive more, and although it might locally solve a problem, it actually just ingrains an unhealthy lifestyle. And actually that pollution is still around in the air and people are actually driving more. So fundamentally a healthier town is actually one where people live healthier lives. And it'd be really useful to know where we're losing life expectancy. I totally get it that we've got a serious problem with the air quality, but the solution is very different to actually building more roads.
Take the train line out and then we won't have a problem.
So in terms of the life expectancy, hopefully we should have that. We're trying to do that at the moment. It's quite complex to do, but we're trying to do that, and healthy life expectancy as well. It's it's difficult to do at that small area, but we will do that. We wouldn't be able to do infant mortality at that level just because of the very, very small numbers. But we will have infant mortality at borough level, but we won't be able to do it at a ward level because there's such small numbers. You wouldn't be able to. We can't share it. They'd be suppressed.
Yeah, but just on that point, if you do it annually, the numbers are very low. But if you did it for a decade or something, then obviously you get a better.
Yeah, we end up having to, if the numbers are below 5 within an area, it depends on the geography we're looking at, we'd have to suppress them. But we can look at trends and we can aggregate them up. But yeah, we're looking at life expectancy at the moment. And we can give an indication of infant mortality, but it'll be at a large level, and smoking and pregnancy and all the other things that impact on infant mortality.
Thank you, Chair. Just following on from something that Councillor Watkins and Councillor Phillips said earlier, there has been a planning proposal put into North Warwickshire County Council for 382 plus probably houses to be built behind the houses on Camphill Road. And that will necessitate for 2 houses on Camphill Road to be bulldozed so a road can be built there. So obviously from the 382 houses, access onto Camphill Road, which will obviously have an impact on the traffic on Camphill Road, and as a subsequent to that, it will impact on the health of people in the area, the amount of traffic coming into Nuneaton as well. So if you can look at that as part of the health issue,
I mean,
that would be good.
So in planning proposals we should be looking at, and it's maybe that's too small a development that they wouldn't always look at, but we should be encouraging to look at the health impacts of their proposals. That's one of the things that we're trying to encourage the developers to do, and that we will do as well in planners. So that would be one of the things that we would hope that people would look at. We can't do everything, but that's certainly one of the things that we would hope to look at.
Because there isn't a proposal for a GP surgery there either. So that will impact on the Camphill area.
So in terms of the health planning, we're very much, we potentially weren't as much in the past, but certainly that health, NHS England, CCG, Public Health are all very involved in trying to do some of the health planning around new housing developments, the impact that has on health services. So there's a lot of work on that at the moment, and not just being about GPs, but also about the other services that wrap around that, pharmacies and other health and wellbeing services. So there's a lot of work going on around that at the moment to try and make sure that we do take that much more into account, and we have that conversation with developers as well.
Councillor Watkins, you indicate.
Right, okay. Just coming on that then, Ingrid. So 382 houses going on to Camp Hill Road. So that's potential, two cars per house, that's 760 or more cars. Got to come into the Nuneaton town centre to go out. So even if they work at the at Moira or anything, they've got to drive into Nuneaton town centre through the two air quality issues to drive out. And until we can get county planners to take this seriously, you will always have. And so no matter looking back at the past 10 years of the cardiovascular, your cancer and your obesity, you will still have that. So you've still got your figures to say this is what people are dying of in this borough. They're dying of cancer, they're dying of heart attacks, they're dying of obesity. You've still got them for the past 10 years. You don't need them for another 5 years, but it'll still be the same because the road structure is not changing. And the amount of cars that we're now sending into the centre to then drive back out because we've got to go over a railway line is not going to change either. It's just going to get worse. So I just think from a scrutiny, we need to write to the planners of county and ask them to take the JSNA as a priority when looking at planning applications.
Is that a recommendation?
That's a recommendation from me.
Seconded.
All those, Councillor Collins.
Can I just say that active travel is really important. We do need to look at the JSNA, but actually building more roads, get more inactive people, cause more cumulative pollution. And the Rugby Relief Road was far longer, but the expensive bit is building over the West Coast Main Line. And you must be looking at many tens of millions to cross the West Coast Main Line. We cannot even get a bridge from the Dingle across the canal because the County Council wouldn't fund it. So I agree there's a massive funding problem, but what we fund, if I had 40 million, I would have superb health services, not more roads.
Chair, there's always a funding problem for anything for Nuneaton and Bedworth when it comes to the county council. There's never a problem for rugby or anywhere else, but when it comes to Nuneaton, there's always a problem. Well, we can't do it because of this and we can't do it because of that. So that's no excuse. I second the recommendation.
All those in favour, please show. Against?
Could you please record my vote?
Abstentions? It's carried. Did you want to add anything else in terms of the public health update?
It's just there for information, just to let people know about some of the service changes. Oh, the one thing I was wanting to just mention, if that's okay, is the Director of Public Health Annual Report this year, which is on looking at young people and the use of social media. It's obviously there's been some national work around that, and we're trying to look at what that means to people, children in Warwickshire. And one of the things that we're doing is at the moment is asking young people for their views on how they use social media and the impact it has on them. And there's a survey out at the moment, so it's just encouraging young people between 10 and 18 years old to try and complete that survey. We've had over 1,000 responses in the first week so far, but it's making sure we get a really good representative sample from Nuneaton and Bedworth, and lots of really useful information will go into the annual report out next year, but looking at the impact of positive and negative impacts of social media on our young people.
Is that on our website?
We can send you the link and send that round to you.
That would be useful. I think so the links there to
Yeah.
a bit easier.
Well,
Okay.
get our comments to forward it as well.
We move on to item 7, suicide prevention strategy.
Thank you. Just to introduce myself, I'm Paul Mawson. I'm Commissioner Lead for Public Mental Health, so I'm part of the Public Health team at Warwickshire County Council, and I've been involved in the suicide prevention strategy since it was developed and launched back in November at the end of 2016. I think I'd like to start by just recognising that every death by suicide is a tragic event, and you'll notice that I refer to it perhaps as a death by suicide. I try not to use the phrase commit suicide. I think we recognise that that kind of harks back to when it was a criminal act, and I think we're all trying to be a little bit more sensitive with our language now and acknowledge that it is a death by suicide and it is a tragic event. One which affects very many people, not just, unfortunately the person who dies, but also their family, their friends, their co-workers. It can also have a really big impact on the professionals involved in their care, be that the police or the ambulance staff that find them, if they were receiving specialist services or other services. Those individuals can also be affected by that death. Sadly, we know that suicide is a leading cause of death nationally, particularly for men, so men aged 50 to 49, and also for women aged 5 to 34. So if you look at our local figures for Warwickshire, we know that somewhere around between 75 and 80% of the people that die by suicide will be males. We also know nationally that the rate amongst males has sort of plateaued and is potentially starting to dip, which is an encouraging sign. But we know that there is now some growing concern about the rates for women, which are unfortunately nationally just starting to show a bit of an upward trend. So that's something that we're very much watching. So obviously Warwickshire County Council produced a multi-agency suicide prevention strategy, and I do need to stress that whilst I'm kind of fronting it, it is very much and will depend on all of the agencies involved to deliver. There are 7 priorities for the strategy, and they're noted on the report that we've sent through to you. The one thing I want to say about the strategy particularly is that we think it's really important that this document is produced alongside and working very closely with people with lived experience. There's no point in us just kind of writing it and doing what we think is best. We want to engage with people that have got experience of either having family members who have died or attempted suicide, or have been through those situations themselves, so that they can guide us. And that's very much an approach that we've been taking to co-produce the strategy and to co-produce the implementation and the priorities that we're looking to work towards. So in March of 2017, following the launch of the strategy, we developed a multi-agency partnership group. The membership on that group is quite wide and varied, but it's an open group, so we're always open to inviting new membership on, and I'm hopeful and hoping that perhaps after today there might be somebody from the Borough Council that we could co-opt onto that group. The strategy that was developed was very much based around some of the national guidance. So Public Health England particularly have produced a whole suite of resources and information to guide us in terms of what we should be doing. There's also an association called the National Society for the Prevention of Suicides. They similarly have a really good suite of resources. So we kind of took the two of them and used those to inform the priorities that are within our strategy. And our strategy very much focuses not just on secondary care mental health services, as much as that's an important part, but it's also about thinking about what's the role for primary care here, and how can we work within our communities to reach people and provide better support for them. The National 5-Year Forward View for Mental Health, which is our national kind of driving document for mental health services, set a target to reduce suicides by 10% by 2021. If you look at the figures that we've shared with you, where we know in a 3-year period we had just over 180 deaths, that's a really small number we're talking about in terms of a reduction. For us as a team and as a department, we felt that wasn't ambitious enough for Warwickshire, just to reduce our deaths by 10%. So we looked into some work that has been undertaken internationally that's coming into the UK now, which is called a zero suicide ambition or approach. It's not a target, so we're not saying we're going to definitely get suicides down to 0, but we've embraced this zero suicide approach, which means we're all hoping that everyone will kind of really go that extra mile to try and prevent every death. It's about challenging some of those myths that you may have heard, that for some individuals suicide is an inevitability. We really want to challenge that and say for every person there are ways in which we can intervene and hopefully enable that person to live. So the strategy outlined the zero suicide ambition. It went to the Health and Wellbeing Board, to Warwickshire County Council's Cabinet, to the clinical commissioning groups, for them to endorse as an approach and something that we would aspire to. And that was taken forward, and that is something that we're working towards. All of the development of the strategy was undertaken, was led in a way by an audit of the coroner's records of death by suicides. So one of our former consultants in public health, Charlotte Gath, went out to the coroner's office and read files relating to deaths by suicides over a 2-year period. The purpose of that was to help us kind of understand much more, in much more of an in-depth way, what was going on for those individuals at the point at which they died. Were there any intervention points? Were there missed opportunities where people could have intervened? And how could we use that information to guide what we're doing moving forward? What that audit revealed to us that a third of the people who died by suicide in Warwickshire were in contact with secondary care mental health services at the point at which they died. That meant 2/3 of individuals were not. And for me, I think that really makes this very much a public health issue. It is about what our secondary care services are doing, but it needs to be much more than that. So how are we supporting people in primary care? How are we kind of upskilling our frontline workers to recognise when somebody really may be in quite some distress and be able to signpost them and help them to access the support that they need? The other thing the audit helped us to understand was more about the risk factors, so what was going on for that individual at the point at which they died. And there were some really strong themes that came out, one of which was financial problems. So your point about gambling, I really do take that. That's definitely an area that we will be looking at as part of the work that we're doing, and I'm happy to give you some more information about that. But there were other things like relationship breakdown was a really big one, particularly for men. So if a male had gone through a divorce or some sort of quite sudden relationship breakdown, that put them at significant risk. Similarly, bereavement was another one that came up. About a quarter of the individuals that were looked at had experience of physical illness and chronic pain. So managing those conditions really did seem to put people under significant stress. We know there were housing concerns, substance misuse, alcohol and drug use came up, social isolation. There was, for some individuals, had very difficult childhood circumstances, and that again was another issue that came up. Family history of suicide, and it's already been mentioned here today, lots of concern around self-harm, and I'm quite happy to talk about some work that we've got planned around that issue as well. Those findings were what came up through the local audit, but they pretty much matched what we knew from some of the national research around what would be risk factors for suicide. So you'll see in the report that we've given you the figures relating to the deaths locally and where our picture is at. You will notice, no doubt, that Nuneaton and Bedworth in 2014 and 16 flagged as red, which means for the first time since 2009, this district has come up as higher than the national and regional average. Now, there are some caveats around that I would like to just sort of make you aware of, because I'm able to kind of look into the detail of the deaths. In the 2014 to 16 period, in this district and borough, there were 47 people who died by suicide. In the previous 3-year period, there were 45. So we're actually talking about, it's quite small numbers that can be enough to sort of just tip an area over into being red. That's not to say it's not an issue and not something that we should be taking seriously, because I very much believe it is. Particularly, I think, for the north, this northern part of the county, where I think the general trend, if you look at the rates, are that we're on an upward trend. So we definitely do need to take that seriously and do something about it. As I said before, lots of this data is driven by what's happening for our males, and we do need to do a lot more targeted work to reach men. One of the things that we've set up since the launch of the strategy is a campaign called It Takes Pause to Talk. If you're not familiar with that, I'd encourage you to kind of Google it and have a look at the campaign. Essentially, it's been led by Coventry and Warwickshire Partnership Trust. It was founded by one of their mental health nurses, working in partnership with Coventry and Warwickshire Mind. And they pitch up very much at male-dominated venues, particularly sporting venues. So I've been out with them at the Rico Arena when the Wasps were playing. They pitch up Mind. Have got a really fancy bus that's converted where you can have private conversations just to kind of draw people in. And they talk to men about their mental health, about their well-being. They talk to women who look after men to say, actually, we need to all be a little bit more mindful about what's going on with our men. They give out these resource cards just so that people know what support is available to them. And I was speaking to the founder of that campaign today, who is actually trying to negotiate with Nuneaton and Bedworth Football Club to actually come along to one of their events and start engaging with men locally here around the campaign. There are some plans to develop that further, and one of the things we've been talking about is actually trying to reach other male-dominated venues, so perhaps turning up to the pubs, going to the gambling, to the bookies, so that we can go into barbers and hairdressers, that places where we know men congregate that bit more. So that's a piece of work that they've got now to move forward. The next thing I think I'd like to let you know is that we have had hopefully a really positive opportunity to bid for some national monies around suicide prevention. Because there is some concern now about the figures from a Warwickshire perspective, we have been allocated some funds nationally. We had a very tight timeline to turn around a bid, and I'm hopeful by mid to end March now, because we haven't heard currently, that we will have heard the outcome of our bid. And as soon as we hear if that's been successful, I'll let Rachel know, and hopefully she can give you an update with regards to that. What that means is we will have some dedicated, additional dedicated resource for suicide prevention that will allow us to really upscale what we're doing to make much more of a difference and much more of an impact. I've mentioned that children and young people are one of the areas where we need to focus on. We've been quite fortunate in Warwickshire, and I'm going to touch wood as I say this, that we haven't had a death of a minor for quite some considerable time. So our focus here with children and young people is about building their resilience even further, about building their well-being and making sure that they know where to go and how to access support should they need it. The other area where we need to have a really big focus on is self-harm. And one of the things that we've undertaken, a specialist registrar in public health did a needs assessment around the self-harm. She pulled together a number of recommendations, and today I was emailing colleagues about it to say we need to pull together a working group now to kind of pull together a really tight, focused action plan so that we can start to really address and get underneath what's going on locally around self-harm. I live in Nuneaton. I have a child who's a teenage age. I know how much her language has changed. Just in a very short space of time, she went from not knowing anything about self-harm to actually talking to me about it and talking to me about, lots of my friends are talking about this at school. So I personally think there's a massive issue locally, and we really need to unpick that, and that's definitely something that I'm committed to doing. One of the other areas that I'm really passionate about is we know that there's been a number of people, lots of people that have been affected by, have been bereaved by suicide, and one of the things that we committed to doing through the strategy was looking at how we could provide better support for them. I was given some additional resource to undertake a pilot scheme around a dedicated county-wide support service for people who've been bereaved by suicide. We've just completed a tender process for that service and have awarded a contract to Kaleidoscope Plus Group, and I'm having a first meeting with them tomorrow to look at how we're going to start mobilising that contract now and getting their provision in place, which I hope will be a step in the right direction to people getting some support across the county for this. One of the other areas we recognise links to is parent and infant mental health. We've set up a strategic group county-wide to look at how we can strengthen the support available to parents, particularly in those first couple of years, so when they're adjusting to that role, both in terms of the support for the parents, but also in terms of how they can develop healthy attachments to their children. And the last thing I'd like to mention in terms of particular priorities is training, because I think there is a massive area of work for us to do. We have commissioned training, very specific training in suicide prevention for GPs. I know there's probably a lot of you in the room that would think GPs would have had this already, but the reality is they haven't had very specific bespoke training. So we've commissioned some training for GPs, and that's been rolled out over the last year. We're also looking at continuing to commission mental health first aid so that community workers can understand what mental health issues are and have some tools in their resources to support people from a mental health first aid point of view. There's other things that I've detailed in the report there in terms of work that we've had ongoing. One of the ones I wanted to mention is the Help is at Hand resource, which I hope is something that's been circulated to you. This is a document, a really useful document if you're aware of individuals in your communities and families who have been affected by death by suicide, which kind of talks them through what might happen then in terms of a coroner's inquest. It talks them through some of the support that's available. So I would encourage you to just be aware of that and help us disseminate that knowledge out to individuals that resource is available. I think that probably covers the main things that I wanted to say. Very finally, however, this poster was meant to come out in your pack and it didn't. So if I send you this as an electronic version, could it please go out with the minutes? Whenever I talk about suicide, I don't like to leave without kind of saying something about the support that's available. I'll pass this around, but this is a new resource that it's an update of an existing resource that we've just done. They've come into the office this week. It lists a range of support that's available for people, from the Books on Prescription service to online services to telephone helplines to support available face-to-face through our wellbeing hubs, through to the psychological therapies provision at CWPT, and then it also signposts children and young people to the new CAMS provision, now known as the RISE service. We've got loads of these in the office. We've got them digitally so that they can go up on any plasma screen. So if you'd like copies of these, please do get in touch with me and I'll sort you out. In addition, there's a web link at the bottom, so warwickshire.gov.uk/mental health. There's further information about all of these services and others. And the other thing I have in addition to these are very small little business cards, which I could leave a stack of them and perhaps give them to Rachel to bring in next time she's coming in, but they could be left downstairs. We're getting really good feedback about those because people can just pick them up, slip them in their pocket and then take them away and have a look, rather than it's quite discreet, and wherever we're leaving them they're just disappearing. So I have got those resources as well which I can leave with you.
So you email that through to
yes.
me, I'll
Mrs. Sonnecourt.
Thank you. I haven't got much to say. I mean, obviously it is concerned, with the rates rising, and it does concern me, some of the things that leading risk factors, financial problems, and with sort of the way things are going with changes in the benefit system, universal credit and things, that's actually going to push more people in that direction. So the other thing is, you're obviously trying to disseminate all the knowledge because there's an awful lot of very good stuff, that has gone on. It's sort of trying to make sure communication, as I mentioned before, getting it in the right places, I guess, I don't know, obviously, but that, like sort of, the men's glues and what have you and things, I presume you're sort of trying to target all those sort of places, what have you.
I think your point about the benefit system and what's going on there is a really key one. I know from the audit that was done, that was definitely a very strong issue for some individuals. There was one person who died by suicide who unfortunately had their benefits stopped that day, and that was the thing which led to their, which was a significant factor leading to
a lot of these factors are also the same as for homelessness, aren't they? So you're sort of trying to tie in with.
So one of the things that we've done is the people who are commissioning the council-funded support services around welfare rights, benefits, particularly through the CAB, they sit on our multi-agency steering group to help us make that link. We've also offered them priority places onto some of the training, so particularly the mental health first aid training, so that we can upskill their workers to make that link between suicide, mental health and the work that they're doing. Actually they're already aware of the link and they bit our hand off to come onto the training, so that bit I feel like we're starting to make some inroads. One of the things I would like to do with the next version of this document is actually have some of those services listed on there so that we know where there are significant risk factors such as debt, finance, housing, that people can find that information from that one central place. We do link to those services from our webpage on the council, but I think having some of those on there would be useful as well. Communication is a massive issue. With this new resource that we've put together, it's going out far and wide. It's going out to GP surgeries, parish councils, town councils, everywhere and anywhere, libraries, any community hub resources like Hatterspace, you'll get one locally, those kind of things. We've sent it out to schools. So we're trying to do everything that we can about that bit, but I'm really open to suggestions. The other thing I would like some thoughts about is if this is very much a one-size-fits-all, I think moving forward we need to get much more targeted with our communications to reach particular groups. And I think men may need something very bespoke and different to them. So one of the things we've put into the bid that's been submitted is to do a co-production piece of work with men to try and get them to help us better reframe the messages that we're putting out, to encourage them and support them to seek support and advice when they need it.
Move on to members. What do you want? Councillor Watkins first.
Well, I've got a few for you here. Almost run out of ink.
Oh.
Right. So on the groups that you were saying that you concentrate on for men, you said about football clubs. But what about rugby clubs,
Yeah.
cricket clubs, gyms,
Yeah, we're doing all of those.
hotels, schools?
Yeah.
Because we could help as a council. We could help with telling you local football clubs. There'd be younger males, obviously. But, also, the sheltered housing that we've got, have you got a contact within our housing department where we could perhaps put some information up in some of the sheltered housing, because you was on about
really
people
good.
dying
Yeah.
when they're alone and things like that, or committing to
That's a great idea. Happy to have contacts.
perhaps give you a contact from the housing where we could put some information up within our sheltered housing. We could also get something into some of our gyms and everything with everyone active, because we could control the everyone active people, but we wouldn't be able to control, I think it's still called the Leisure Trust, we've got no control over that. But also Carver, Citizens Advice Bureau, but also I wondered if you thought of contacting some of the developers, because there's a lot of developments going on, and when I had a development done in Kingswood Ward, we put all of these things, all these sort of leaflets and information into the welcoming packs. So perhaps the developers could put something like, you only need a little spike in interest rates. So, and that it wouldn't be good for some of these people that are living beyond the means. The digital display, we should be able to help you with the town hall and the civic hall anyway.
Yeah.
But obviously you'll have to run that through the chair and through the portfolio holder. On your improving data and evidence, how will you go about that for, again, I'm coming back to gambling, but so the people within this borough have to go to Coventry.
Yeah.
So how would you pick up if somebody's got real problems with gambling and they're thinking of ending their life or things like that? Are you going to be dealing with people, these services within Coventry and further out of this borough? And how are you going to know where these people live? Because a lot of it's confidential. So I just wanted to ask about that. Also, on your information, improving data and evidence, things like that, will you be going down to sort of race and religion as well? Because it's quite shocking to see that we've gone up now to in the red category. Has that got any effect on us seeing more people come into from Poland or Romania or whatever? So just a few questions there. You can answer
All really good. Yeah, I'll do my best. They're really good questions. I think you came up with some really great suggestions in terms of the communications and different places that we could reach. There's a member of my team, Claire Taylor, who's leading the distribution of our resources around the services that you've seen. So all of those suggestions I will take back and give to her and make sure that they were either on her list anyway, and if they're not, get them on her list and get her to make those contacts. So I'll certainly pick those up. In terms of the football clubs and your other suggestions about rugby clubs and schools, that's part of the It Takes Balls to Talk campaign. Not so much the schools bit, but we'll pick them up anyway through other routes. But certainly those more male-dominated, a broader range of male-dominated environments is part of what It Takes Balls to Talk is hoping to do should we get this additional resource, because it will give them a little bit more capacity to actually get out and do the doing. One of the other things I spoke to Alex about today was actually trying to make that campaign much more targeted to areas where we know we've got particular concerns. So obviously Nuneaton and Bedworth has come up high this time. You'll have seen in the table that Warwick District has been high for quite some time. This is the first period where it came down. So we were talking about actually trying to really focus in on those areas and do some much more targeted work. So we'll pick that up. In terms of the data, it's a real challenge. You'll have seen in the report that the most recent data I have takes us to the end of 2016 and we're now partway through 2018. So that is a challenge because that's a massive gap. The data we've got currently only takes us up to the point at which the strategy was launched. So we don't know yet whether any of the work that we've been doing over the last year is making a difference. There are, however, pockets of areas in the country which are piloting what's called real-time data. So this is where there's an agreement between the Coroner's Office, the police and the public health teams to have an immediate notification of a death by suicide. That means then you can offer much more targeted support, but you need the resource and the services ready to do that. It also makes you much more able to pick up if you've got contagions where perhaps you could have deaths. A number of deaths in the same family, unfortunately, is quite, does happen. So that's one of the things that we're looking at, and it's one of the things that we've put into our bid to say, if we can get some additional resource, we could look at scoping what might real-time surveillance look like for Warwickshire, and help us actually think about commissioning a service that would be able to respond to those families in a much more targeted way than we've been able to do. Linking it to the gambling question then, I appreciate that this is a massive issue. I've had personal experience of this with family members, and I know the devastation it can cause, not just to that individual but also to their families. I think there's a number of ways that we could look at this. One is obviously through the bookies themselves and building links with those, because I think the people are coming in and out of their places all of the time. If we can have some information, even if it was just the little business cards to say, look, this is support that's available that they could pick up, that might be a start. So that's one thing that we can look at doing. If there are specific organisations in Coventry, I'm quite happy to look at building some links with those as well, so that they can be aware of the work that we're doing, and kind of make sure that they're linked in properly with the more specialist mental health services in Warwickshire, so that people can get support that way. I'm open to suggestions though. If you do have other ideas, let me know and we'll think it. But I'm definitely going to put a line in our action plan around gambling, so that we actually pick that up in a much more strategic way moving forward.
The thing I think I was coming out from Coventry is, will you be able to ask them where these people are coming from, or what towns?
Yeah, that's a good idea. Yep, I'm with you now. Yeah. Yep.
Because, like I say, we've got nothing like that within this borough, so they've got to travel out of the borough to talk to somebody else about the problems that they've got in the borough. Brilliant.
Okay. And then race and religion was your other point.
Race and religion, but I think with the gyms as well, that would be a particularly good one, especially if you've got somebody on steroids or something or whatever. But we could definitely out with the few gyms that we've got.
Yeah,
with your everyone active.
And we do. I still have links into LB and the Leisure Trust as well, so I'm sure we'll be able to get some information through and support from them as well. So yeah, very happy to do that. The race and religion one is a bit more of a tricky one, because you would think that we would have that data that describes, you know, what race and religion the individuals were when they die. We don't have that. And that makes it much more trickier for me to say to you, these are the definite information. From the audit, we could get some or assume some information about that. So I know there were some individuals who were asylum seekers. I know there were 1 or 2 people that clearly had Polish, say, heritage. So that one is much more of a challenge. I think the other pieces of work that we're doing around promoting mental health and well-being more generally, we would seek to link in with some of the faith leaders around that, because I do think they have a key role, and it's probably an area where we've not done as much work as we need to do. So that's something that I'm happy to pick up and think about how we can link in with faith leaders and some of our community groups around those issues. I've done quite a bit of work in the past with what was the Race Equality Partnership that was funded by the County Council, is now the Equip Service, and they are very supportive of the work that we're doing. So I know in Nuneaton and Bedworth, for example, they've taken some of our campaign messages out to the Edward Street Centre. So we've got those links. We just need to build on them now and perhaps revisit some of that to make sure that we're covering those issues moving forward.
It's just that, you know, where I work, there's a good 80% of the people I work with are from Romania. And I would say just about every single one of them smoke.
Yeah.
And so, you know, the different things that different race religions are going to bring to the health problems is going to be massive. And so, although it might be a delicate subject, it's still something you're going to have to ask, and you're going to have to record it. Because if that shot us up from 10.2 to 14.1, I'm not saying it has, but who knows if it hasn't.
I mean, the data that we have access to is kind of national data, so we can't actually, I don't think, influence what we get. We just get what we're given. But I think your point is right, that we need to also make sure that when we're looking at the implementation of our strategy, that we're covering race and religion, and that's something that I will take away and just have another look at and make sure that we're picking those issues out.
Okay, thank you.
Well, Chris has asked something that I wanted to ask, but does the national data, how much does it identify causes?
It does. They do look at trends in the same way that we did. So, for example, all the risk factors that I kind of gave you, they did match up with what we know about the national data. There's he's a professor, Louis Appleby, that looks at the deaths by suicide and produces national level reporting around that. So we look at that when that comes out, just to compare where we are from a Warwickshire point of view in terms of the trends and if there's emerging trends. So unfortunately, you know, we know that over the course of time there are new ways that people will use to die, and we have to be mindful of those so that we can target our prevention activities accordingly.
So is there anything unique to Warwickshire, or are we just
It's a really
similar
interesting
problems
one.
to everyone else?
I think it's a really complex picture in Warwickshire. I think if you asked most people, would they think Warwickshire would be high for deaths by suicide? I think lots of ways people would say no. They would tend to think it would be the more urban areas. So I think in that respect we are quite unusual that we're flagging up as high, but I don't think it's because of one thing. I think it's lots of different factors reflecting we have different communities. From Nuneaton and Bedworth, the issues that may cause people from Nuneaton and Bedworth to die by suicide may be different to people in Rugby, and again different to people in the south. And we've got to target what we do in terms of prevention, you know, accordingly, which is why having some local intelligence and localising what we're doing from a prevention point of view is something that I think we need to get much better at moving forward.
Thank you.
Yeah, lots of issues. It's a really good, all the stuff you're doing, and I really do like this zero suicide ambition, because although it's an ambition, you don't get to zero. It's a mindset that actually we're trying to drive it down and down. I saw some stuff on TV about the railway industry, because they obviously had a massive problem. and have been doing a lot of work
Yeah.
on it. And one was actually training staff to recognise people and to talk to people and things. Is there particular things in the non-railway area where there's particular key public transport staff or housing officers? Is there anyone you'd like to sort of get to and actually give more training? Because I think a lot of the talking stuff early has been quite effective.
I think one of the points you've picked up on, and it is a really key point, I think unfortunately there's lots of people are quite scared and frightened to bring up the subject of suicide. So we know that that can be a barrier. Lots of people might be concerned about an individual, but actually be too frightened to ask the question of how bad are you? How bad has things got? Because they think putting the word suicide in their mind might actually make them more likely to make an attempt, when actually that's not true. So one of the things we need to get out to everybody, be they a frontline worker or a member or just, the general public, is actually asking the question is okay. It's fine to ask if you're feeling suicidal. It's not going to make you more likely to die by suicide. But what it might mean is that might be the key intervention which actually gets somebody into support. So my roundabout way of answering your question is I really want to get that message across to as many people as we can. In terms of particular frontline workers, there are some that we are very much targeting through the mental health first aid training that we're offering. Housing officers are one of those groups because we do know, and so another person that Rachel works with, Emily, is commissioning mental health first aid particularly and specifically for housing staff in district and borough councils. We're targeting people like the CABs, anyone that's kind of within a risk factor. Those are the individuals that we really want to target initially with the mental health first aid training. We've got 3 courses that are running through January to March, and they were all oversubscribed. As soon as we put out dates, they snapped up, and that is with us being quite targeted with our communications and marketing of them. Does that answer your question?
So just one final point, adding to Chris's list of good ideas. I think we've got the In Touch magazine, which is 16 pages. That little A4 list is an absolute sort of thing that should be in there, because In Touch goes to people whether they want it or not, and if they're bored or whatever, they might look at it. So it's a good way of pushing stuff out without actually any embarrassment that they're actually going to look it up. So I'd like to recommend we actually ask the council if they could put a little quarter page, third page sheet or that sort of format in Touch.
Well, I wouldn't stop it just In Touch. I'd
No,
do it
well,
through the
there's
Commons,
other
do it on the council, Facebook and Twitter.
Social media, I think,
Yeah.
are massive.
Councillor Ellis.
Thank you, Chair. Some sterling work. It's really, really good. I've just got a big problem with this word resilience, which is everywhere. If you look up the definition of resilience, the opposite of it is weakness, which immediately stigmatises. So I see you're totally on board with that. But that's when particularly young men turn to drugs or gambling because they don't want to be identified as weak or vulnerable. So that's one issue with it. Word resilience is everywhere around schools and colleges. We're giving lessons on how to be more resilient, which just individualises. I've just googled a definition of resilience. I'm just going to read it out. It's very short. Psychological resilience is defined as an individual's ability to successfully adapt to life tasks in the face of social disadvantage or the other highly adverse conditions. So it feels like we're approaching from completely the wrong point. We're pouring funds into mental health first aid training GPs, all of these resources which are good. But if we tackle the structural issues at source, the benefit cuts, the inequalities, then we wouldn't need all of these. So I know there are other reasons for suicide and the pain management, etc. But I just wanted to make those observations. And also, I just wondered whether you take any account of what I call longer term suicide, which is the self-destruction behaviours that wouldn't be recorded as suicide, that wouldn't be death by hanging or overdose, but it would be through being a rough sleeper or a drug addict or alcohol dependent, those sorts of things.
Okay, so the resilience point you make, I think, is really very valid. It's something that we're having conversations about within our team, because we've started to get to the same place that you're at already, that sometimes is not the most helpful definition or word to use, because it does put all the onus on the individual. If there's a problem, it's because you're not resilient enough. And actually, you throw enough stuff at an individual, there's some of the things we read in those reports, nobody would be able to cope with the things that some individuals have to face. So part of what we want to do through this co-production piece of work with men is to try and come up with a better way of framing that. We also have within our team in public health some really good links with health psychologists at Coventry University, and I've just asked, funnily enough, could I have some conversations with them about how can we reframe some of this so it's not about you're not strong enough and you don't know what you're doing, particularly as you say, when lots of these situations it's caused by things that are beyond your control. I still think that there is a place for supporting you to know how to cope when the going gets a bit tough, because it will do, it's a fact of life, but that needs to be put out in a much more positive way so that it's not about you being weak. So I take your point and I agree with you, and it's definitely something that we're looking at. Longer term suicides, I think that's a really valid point as well, particularly around drugs and alcohol. And one of the things we've done recently is, you're probably aware that those services are commissioned by Public Health, and the commissioner of those services is now sitting on our suicide prevention group so that we can make those links. We've also done quite a bit of work in this past year around trying to get the drugs and alcohol services working better with the specialist mental health services, because we know people often bounce between the two, and that's not going to help us in terms of a suicide, the longer term suicides as well. So it's definitely on our agenda. Certainly there was a lot of individuals in the audit who had both mental health needs and substance misuse needs. So it's definitely something that we're looking at, and happy to pick that up again moving forward.
Just one more thing before I pass this on. I came across a really great resource, and it's a tech service for young people, texting school nurse, which isn't on here.
Yeah, I think
that's really good.
It is really good. I think we're sort of a little bit struggling with how many to put on, because if we put too many on, I think people are going to be overwhelmed. And we know Chat Health has done a lot of promotion of that service, whereas the Rise one is quite new, and we want to kind of get that into people's minds. I will check, however, that on our mental health page that there is a button for the Chat Health, because there might not be, and that's something that we could look at adding to that page.
There are some recommendations they would like us to consider on page 39 and 40. Bottom of the page, 441. Members happy to forward those recommendations on to the Cabinet Member for Health.
Can we add something about communication onto them? Because I think it is important to use all our channels.
We appreciate
Members were happy for that to be.
Yeah.
I need a second.
Yes.
Yeah.
We have communication. Move on to item 8, health and wellbeing, and report.
Chair, can I just ask one more question?
Just move the item on.
Well, because
Maybe, as long as it's a quick
Right.
one.
also on the information from Coventry, not just the people that well, just people like, and one about the counselling centre as well. Will you be able to get the information from them of death by suicide of people from this borough?
So we have the Clinical Suicide Prevention Lead for Coventry Warwickshire Partnership Trust, sits on our multi-agency steering group. She's new in post, so we're still building the links with her. But through the STP work we're doing, we also have a suicide prevention group that's sitting as part of that. So the data and how we analyse data will be looked at as part of that, and I'm sure they'd be willing to share with us once we've got the appropriate agreements in place. I'm sure they'll be happy to share with us data around deaths by suicide locally.
And on the drugs and alcohol, you will link gambling as well?
Yeah, so we can link in with those things.
Yeah, okay. Brilliant.
We're on to item 8.
Item 8 was the health and wellbeing review, which it was really for information. That was last year's annual review, just to see the process for this year's reviews and the rate at the moment. So there should be a new report coming out shortly. They're just collecting information about that at the moment. And I imagine there's something around the last year.
Am I up to that?
Finished?
Yes, it was just for
It
information.
said this report for information. I presume you might be able to answer some questions if members have got them.
I can probably answer some. It's Rachel Barnes' report, so I can take some of that back. Is there any particular questions?
I've got Mrs. Concord, do you wish to
No,
speak
I don't think I
something?
need to say
No?
anything.
Thank you.
I was just going to add, I just wanted to make a comment. We've sent our comments through for the new annual report for next year, so you should have examples on the templates. I'm hoping that we've got an example on most of the items.
Councillor Concord.
Yeah, I just noticed on this list Warm and Well programme, because obviously we've had some cold snaps and there's a lot of links between all sorts of things. And Warm and Well is actually quite a good idea, and it's like boiler replacements and lots of insulation things. And that, a lot of that's been cut by government cuts, the sort of normal support for it. So I just didn't know if you knew where that was going, the Warm and Well stuff.
The campaign is still running, and obviously, I mean, again, actually, it's probably a good issue that we can make sure that you have the information on that you can put up. If you can be able to share that through your communications, that would be fantastic. It's still running a campaign, so yeah. Make sure I can send that through.
Any member? I've just got a couple. It says about the 563 families in terms of priority families across, I'm presuming that's across Warwickshire. Because I'm just not sure, because I know when I was looking at this report, 15, 16, there was already 131 priority families in Wembrook, so I'm just surprised either it's that low, or I'm hoping that it's not just here.
No, I think the highest numbers, my understanding, the highest numbers are in this area, but that I'll
So-
double check. I can come back and check, but I would have
I
thought
think
that
for
would be
members
right.
it'd be useful for a breakdown of, in terms of the wards, to see what the priority families are, and that might be something that the priority families need to come to this meeting. And I think it's miserable, it's a comment rather than, I don't think you're going to be able to answer it. You said about the increase in the uptake of school meals, etc. Now, in light of the government decision yesterday, how do you think that's going to impact in terms of the free school meals and
Chair, I've got
how it will
also
take
got a question that's linked to that. At the nursery school in Stockingford, and I'm sure elsewhere as well, if a child gets free school meals, you also get a little pot of money. What's it called now?
Pupil premium.
That's it, pupil premium. So how is that going to be affected as well?
I can go back and ask the questions. Unfortunately, I'm not able to answer that.
it'd be useful as well? And in terms of the new youth club in Kingston Road, Nuneaton, is this something that's been funded by the Health and Wellbeing Board, or is it?
It's not new. I started it years ago.
That's what I was just wondering, because I was thinking, so
That's
not-
something that's not
So
right.
we could have some clarification around that then, because I was a bit surprised myself seeing.
I have had support from the Northern Area team with it though, but it's not new.
No, that's what I was wondering. So any other members got any questions they'd like Rachel to take back? No? Thank you for that. You're very welcome to stay, but I'm sure you don't want to.
Didn't like it, didn't want to.
Move on to item 9. Help yourself, Rachel.
No problem. Okay, so the report that you've got this evening is in relation to the Corporate Health Champions Group. You have received a report every year in relation to this group. And just to add a little bit of background context to it, around about 2014-15, the previous scrutiny panel, so the Health, Housing and Community Scrutiny Panel, had a working group where they identified a range of items that they wanted to implement to improve health and wellbeing for the borough. So the initial report from that group recommended that the Corporate Health Champions Group be established, and that group has representatives from every single department within the Borough Council. And the idea is that it embeds health and wellbeing throughout those departments, with lead officers responsible for the elements that you'll see within the action plan. So the original action plan was agreed and it's been delivered. So, and what you've got here and what I'll take you through tonight is the action plan that the group's been looking at in 2017-18. So if you look at Appendix A, and you might be familiar with some of these concepts. Apologies that I missed the previous report being presented. I'm not sure if they talked about the concept of making every contact count. No, okay. So making every contact count is about utilising opportunities that we have with the people that we come into contact with, and if it is appropriate, we can signpost them to other agencies and give them support. So we made a commitment as an organisation to make MEC mandatory. So that is for all frontline officers of the council, that those who are kind of providing that front-facing work, they will attend MEC and be trained in it. So as of February 2018, it says here that there's a gap here. It's actually 124 of our employees have been trained in MEC. In addition to that, one of the good successes around this is that for those roles who require an awareness of health and wellbeing and an understanding of MEC and the concept around it, the job descriptions, we've got wording now that is being put into all new job descriptions that will be a requirement, so it will be a corporate requirement, mandatory requirement of that job to have an understanding of health and wellbeing and the MEC concept. So that's that. Any questions on MEC?
Well, we had the suicide thing before. Is suicide awareness in that as well?
Within the MEC,
Yeah.
mental health and wellbeing will be within that. So not specifically the suicide focus, but in terms of understanding mental health and wellbeing and signposting and the services, then yes, there will be a requirement for people to understand that, and particularly managers as well, around stress awareness and mental health and wellbeing. You know, we have an understanding around that too. Okay, so the second thing on here you've got is deliver NBBC's commitment to cardiovascular disease. You might recall that quite a few years ago we became a heart town, and we had a 5-year commitment to the British Heart Foundation. Councillor Watkins, you were our champion during that time. You ran some of the races, and you know you supported it significantly. At the time that we were a heart town, we had a health inequalities officer who kind of coordinated that work. And unfortunately we no longer have that officer anymore. So our formal support, after our 5 years of kind of commitment, our formal support to the British Heart Foundation has ceased. But having said that, there are certain things in terms of kind of that we continue doing that you'll see here. So previously we had an annual fun run that was kind of delivered in aid of the British Heart Foundation. You'll see here that for this current year, in partnership with George's Gift, we are replacing that with a 1, a 3 and a 6 mile fun run on the 25th of March, so that's a week on Sunday. There's a 10k race that's planned in September, and in addition to that we've got a park run that's now being delivered through the Miners Welfare Park as well. In terms of specific support to the British Heart Foundation, we still maintain, I don't know if you've seen the donation bins for the British Heart Foundation, they're still on our land. Yeah, there's some out the back. And what I've put here is in terms of the tonnage, you'll see that it's quite significant. Book banks, 10,970 tonnes have been gathered, and clothing banks, 24,320 tonnes. So in terms of kind of recycling, etc. It's saving that kind of landfill and that kind of work. Yes.
It can't be 10,000 tonnes of books.
Well, that's the information that I've been given from the British Heart Foundation.
What's the information you get?
Yeah, but 10,000 tonnes of books would be sort of like a quarter of a tonne per household from the Neaton, so...
There's 13 sites. 13 sites where they're collected. There was none before we started this.
Just thinking the number of zeros is wrong, because 10,000 tonnes for a 100,000 population town is something like 1/10 of a tonne of books per person in town, which is...
Has this been over 5 years though?
This has been, yeah, I mean, this is like a kind of an ongoing rolling figure that we get. I mean, I think you still get you get the same information that I get. I mean, I can query it if it would help, if you want specifics. But I mean, that's the figure. That is certainly the figure that I've been given, and it's the most up-to-date figure. I think it's as of February. They're the details that we've had.
Can you just clarify?
Yeah, no problem.
I think it's probably 10,000 kilograms or something. I think that...
I'll check it and I'll let you know.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's the work that's been done in terms of kind of getting people having their hearts, keeping their hearts healthy. In addition to that, we've committed to deliver the Sports, Recreation and Communities Facilities Strategy. So that was formally adopted by Cabinet last year. The Cabinet report is going to be presented in April, and that will kind of give an overview of the strategic direction there. Turning over the page is another strategy, which is in terms of the playing pitch strategy. This is being led by the sports development team and Kevin Hollis. And in addition to that, some of the developers' contributions are being used to facilitate kind of sports development within areas of the borough. You'll see there as well that the group also looks at the delivery of the leisure facilities contract, and in particular what we've been interested in is the promotion of a passport to leisure scheme, particularly in areas of deprivation, and our wish has been to increase the uptake of the passport to leisure. My understanding is, and there's a gap here, where I've tried to assess what the baseline of the passport to leisure has been and how much it's increased by. I'm still waiting for a confirmation there. But what I have been given is that what are they called? Who's got the contract? Everyone Active are working to target super output areas. So I think Councillor Watkins, you've been involved in something in the Kingswood area.
That's sports leisure.
Yeah.
Hold on, just come back to this delivery of sports, recreation, community facilities.
Yeah.
Can you confirm that work has come to an end now on the delivery of the playing pitch strategy? Playing pitch strategy. So on page 138.
I mean, all I've got here is the update that I've had from Kevin is that it's currently being refreshed and as part of the Sports England guidance.
So it's not moved. Can you get some clarification on
yeah,
that?
of course I can. Yeah.
So
What is it specifically you want to know?
Well, I've got a feeling that's come to an end now.
Okay.
It's done.
So clarification that it's been completed, and if not, what's replacing it?
Oh yeah.
Okay, no problem. Okay. You happy for me to move on to the PTLs?
Yeah. And
Um,
I can help you on that if you want.
Okay, thank you. Leave it to you. No, I'm joking, sorry. What my understanding is that GERMAC has been working with Everyone Active to target super output areas, Kingswood in particular, and Barpool, and they're looking at working in Abbey next to increase the uptake in Abbey.
Right. You just want to come in on that. Right, so passport to leisure. GERMAC and Liam did send emails out to every councillor asking them if, following my criticism of passport to leisure take-up from one of the groups. I think it could have been mine, planning and environment. But anyway, following that, they sent an email out asking every councillor if they wanted to take up this. So I was probably one of the first to reply, and I took it up within Kingswood. Liam's now done a lot of work in Kingswood and in Barpool, and the passport to leisure has gone up. Well, I think it was a 90 take up, so we've done quite well now. So that has got people out, hopefully,
Yeah, yeah.
taking little
And
passport to
word
leisure.
on spread people
Yes.
saying, what do this?
What I like,
for
what,
free, whatever.
what I like about it is that they're targeting the specific areas where the uptake is the lowest, but also they're targeting the areas with the greatest needs. So it's kind of going right where it needs to be going.
Yeah.
It's not a kind of finger in the air, we're going to go over here and do something in this area. It's kind of, you know, it's not a random approach, so it's positive.
Yeah, it's doing well.
Yeah. Okay, so that's the passport to leisure element. In relation to funding, which is on the next page, page 139, each year Public Health and ourselves have a pot of money. We combine our pot of money around a priority criteria. For 2016-17, and I know that's last year, but the projects have still been delivering. You'll see here that we had 30,000 which we allocated to 6 projects, and there's a whole range of different projects that have benefited from it. So we've got Escape Arts, who did a interactive dementia project, Youth Athletics, which were weekly athletic sessions at the Pingle Stadium, Funky Dance in Bedworth at the Bedworth Community Centre, the Healthy Living Network, the Health Store, and that was around providing, continuing the work of the Health Store, and then yoga and teen yoga, which has been taking place in Camp Hill. For 2017, funding this year has been 20,000, so that's 10,000 from Nuneaton and Bedworth and 10,000 from Public Health. And you'll see there that we funded this year the Health Store, again in Nuneaton. And I'll tell you more about some of their work when I come to the Teen Conception working group that we've had. Nuneaton Harriers, and that's for the athletics. Escape Arts, which again is the ongoing dementia project. And then we wanted to continue to support the Bedworth Heath Community Centre in terms of the community dance. So they're the projects that we've funded this year. Moving on to dementia awareness, I'm conscious that the work of this group has kind of facilitated some of the recommendations that are in here, or some of the work that's in here, sorry. So you'll see that where I think the information that was sent through to Cabinet on the 22nd of November has been adopted. And we're looking at ongoing training for our officers in relation to dementia awareness and the Dementia Friends programme. We're raising awareness and signposting contacts within the council, and that can be via MEC and our kind of frontline services. In terms of providing training to senior managers, that's been delivered. We've had a conference that's been organised, and that's organised by Warwickshire County Council. So a lot of the work around the dementia work is being led by the localities team within Nuneaton and Bedworth. So we're involved in that. We have, as a council, implemented our own dementia and complex needs policy, and so that's something that Nicola Toppin, our estates manager, has done. And then Assets and Street Services have been responsible for doing a buildings assessment, so our key buildings like the Town Hall, the Civic Hall, etc. have been kind of assessed to kind of understand how can they be dementia friendly and look at where in the work programme changes need to be implemented. And then you'll obviously be aware that the Dementia Action Alliance has been formally launched as well by the Mayor. And we're an active participant within the Dementia Active Alliance group as well.
Sure. Just on the dementia, it seems to have slipped off here, but you're supposed to be working with the planned maintenance. So if there's any work done at some of the sheltered housing complexes and things like that, just like, because when I met one of the dementia champions or whatever, it's got that different colours of doors, non-shiny floors, no mirrors and things like that. So I'd like to see that back on there. We're still working with planned maintenance, and that somebody from dementia awareness is giving some advice.
I believe that's taking place.
It's not on there, Rachel, so it's not taking place.
It says here, buildings assessment completed with items built into improvement programmes. So let me check what improvement programmes are. I think that's already covered.
If that means town hall and that, like you just said, it don't mean
just
shelter complexes, does it?
Yeah. sorry, Chair, just to add to that, when you go around these sheltered complexes, they're quite complicated, even if you've not got dementia, to be honest. So the more signage we can put in them, the better, really.
I'll feed that back, but I'll check. I'm sure that the sheltered complexes have already been reviewed.
Yeah.
In fact, I'm 99% certain that that's been done. But I'll check and I'll let you know.
Oh, I'm 99% sure they're not, because because I know that
One of us is going to be wrong there.
some of the things that happened at Kingswood Court, they replaced all the doors and they couldn't. It wasn't planned in, so that they couldn't change different colours and that. So they all had to have the same coloured doors. The floors are still shiny in the kitchen, and apparently that's not. So there's no mirrors. Okay, there's no mirrors up. Shiny surfaces when you go in a lift. That's a no. They're still shiny down there.
Okay.
So, and that was a few years ago.
I'll have
So
to
what sort of
on my list
timescale
to
then?
review.
What time scale are we looking at if it is on our planned maintenance? It's for shelter complexes.
So a bit more detail there.
Yes, please.
No problem. Okay. Moving on, in terms of the County-wide Health and Wellbeing Board and their associated strategy, the group's kind of keen to keep abreast of some of the information that you've heard here tonight. So we, as a council, adopted and approved to support the Warwickshire-wide Health and Wellbeing Strategy on behalf of the Health and Wellbeing Board. And obviously the portfolio holder is a regular kind of attendee at those board meetings. Turn over the page. You'll see here that we want to ensure effective communication of the items from our champions group. So each directorate needs to send a representative, and that representative's got a role, and their role is to make sure A, that they attend, and B, where their name's here, because you'll see where it says who, that not all of the officers, it's not just one person, it's kind of different people across the council that are responsible. But in relation to this, all directorates have committed to send somebody to the group, and that person is a conduit for sharing that information. And here you'll see, Councillor Conticle, you'll see reference to the employee mental health and wellbeing. So this is led by Human Resources, and in terms of kind of recognising that, you know, in the past stress has been a big factor, mental health and wellbeing for our employees has been a big factor in terms of absence. Part of their approach has been to have employee support officers in place, so that there are people who officers can go to share concerns, etc. And if necessary, if they need referrals to other kind of professional support services, they're able to do that. So we've currently got 7 across the organisation that are able to do that. Yeah.
Are they in the same department? Because one of the things is if you've got a lot, they're sort of cross department, aren't they? So if you're in housing, you can talk to someone who's not.
Yeah. Yeah. They are from different directorates.
Rachel, does this council, is it unusual in these stress in terms of absence, or is that
I don't
sort
know,
of commonplace?
I'm not a HR officer, so I can't offer you a kind of a decent comparison, to be honest, but I can find out for you. I wouldn't like to say. I mean, I think public sector sickness absence, I've read in reports where it's increased because of cuts and changes and etc. But in terms of a comparison, I don't know. But I'll check and I can let you know. Okay, so that's in relation to employee health and wellbeing. We've also got our alcohol policy, which has been implemented and approved. And then if I move over onto page 143, we've got 2 activities in here to address initiatives around obesity. Unfortunately, in relation to the first one, I haven't got any figures to show you. So there is a change. Oh, can you hear my stomach? Yeah. Can you hear over there?
Yeah. Do you want a coffee?
No, I'm fine. I'm going to hurry up. I'm going to go and get my tea. Sorry about that. In terms of sports development, they're actively involved in something called the Changemaker programme, and that's about working with families to make them kind of healthier, addressing issues around their weight. So I'm just waiting for figures to go into there. So when I've got them, I'll send them round to you afterwards.
Yeah, in terms of change makers, we've got a few measured miles and a few outdoor gyms and things.
Yeah.
Are they the sort of things they're trying to get them involved in? To sort of get them to do something a bit more? Or?
I don't think, well, possibly the measured miles. To be honest, I don't really know.
Because we've got a lot of good stuff in the book. We've got Walking for Health.
Yeah.
This council does an awful lot of good stuff, but it doesn't tell people enough about it.
I think it's more around a kind of a programme of activities that is defined in a contract that they have to deliver over a period of time. Whether that brings in measured miles or our outdoor gyms, I'd be surprised. But do you want some more information around that, just to understand what it looks like?
It's useful to know what they're promoting, yes.
Okay. Okay, so again, in terms of the, we've got workplace challenges, and that's about our employees being involved. So we've had in the past, I think we've had disc golf competitions, we've had all sorts, haven't we, Shirley, as employees, kind of trying to get our employees active. It's being reviewed at the moment, so how successful it's been, debatable.
We had when it was the British Heart Foundation 5K, we had lots of staff doing it. Are we still doing that with the George's Gifts run and things? Because I haven't had an email to councillor to sign me up.
Right, okay.
But it'd be good if we are actually promoting all these events and the park runs to our staff.
Yes, yeah. I know that the sports development team have been working with the Harriers, and I know that there are some members of our staff that are taking part in those runs. I think Brent Davis is one of them, actually. But in relation to signing, being more proactive within our council, maybe there is a gap there. I shall ask him.
And can you include councillors in all this stuff? Because we're overweight, we sit around, we read too much, and we need to get more fit as councillors.
Talk for yourself.
You signed up for the 5K.
But Chair, this is the Health Committee. We're the healthiest ones here. So the other committees.
So you do the 5K on Sunday?
5K.
That's good.
No, picking up on what Kate said. When we did have Surinder as the health officer, I for one got lots more information. I don't get hardly anything off Kelly. I get nothing as the art champion, and I can get nothing last year and nothing the year before while Kevin has been doing the health. I did bring it up last year, and I think I bring it up most of the year before as well.
I mean, I can feedback about improving communication overall, but I mean, unfortunately, what we haven't got a health officer, so what we're not going to have is that level of kind of the same level of activity and involvement and communication as what we've had previously, because we haven't got that role.
Regardless of whether we've got an health officer or not, Rachel, that is part of Kevin's job. He needs to get the information out there, especially to councillors, and then it's our responsibility then to get that information out to our residents.
Okay.
So he can share that 34 ways, and if he doesn't use it, don't use it, you lose it.
I mean, what I could do on here is, I know on here we've got something about effective communications of items from the Corporate Health Champions team, and they kind of tend to look internally at our employees and stuff. What I could do is add on here for next year, for 18-19, improve communication to yourselves as well, so where there are activities just for all of us, for all the kind of lead officers, all the champions, to just make sure that if it's something relevant, you guys know about it. I can add that in as an action for that, if that would be helpful. And then it's here, isn't it? Okay. Just write that down. Okay, so that's the first bit about the implementing initiative to address obesity. And the second item in relation to that is it links to a piece of work that Environmental Health have been keen on leading on. And unfortunately, ironically, they're looking at the promotion of breastfeeding cafes, but the person who would be leading that is on maternity leave. So at the
She
moment,
can tell us her experience.
yeah. So at the moment, delivery there is a little bit restricted, as you can see in the report. And the second thing that they wanted to do was work with local childminders, and again, that's kind of restrictive because that officer's obviously on maternity leave. What we have had is approval. So, you know, when people come into town and they might want somewhere to kind of breastfeed the baby that's a little bit kind of quiet and a bit of privacy, we have liaised with our customer services here to let people go in the breakout room. So, you know, the room that's in reception is kind of to the side and it's very, very quiet, etc. So we are able to offer that as a facility if somebody does want to go in there and kind of feed their child.
Right, can I just ask, Rich, is there some way to indicate that that's the case? The use of the room?
Well, at the moment it's not publicised, but yes, it will be. Yeah.
Sorry, Rachel, while we're on the subject, I don't think we've got anywhere for a mum and baby change any area either, have we? Not just a feeding, we haven't got the other end either, have we?
No. In terms of like having a unit where somebody can go in and change their child, not as far as I'm aware. I mean, it's probably not one for this, but I mean, I can relay that back in terms of a service the council provides. If that would be helpful. I can mention it to Brent if that. Like a baby change. Baby change unit. Okay.
Well, just on that point, the reduction in the number of toilets was going to come with apparently some money to modernise the ones that are going to remain. So that may be something that we need to ask about as part of that programme, because they all needed modernisation, which is part of the rationale for having less. But obviously, if you are having a modernisation, it's good to note these things at that time.
Okay. I'll mention it to Brent and see what he's got planned. If we turn over the page, addressing teen conception rates, I think this group has all been interested in addressing teen conception issues. There's been a significant amount of work that kind of took place. We've had some really, really good progress here. So initially we committed to establish a teen conception task and finish group, which we've got. There was a summit that was held, not last year, I think it was November 2016, that some of you here might have been part of. Part of that summit was to get pledges from a range of organisations to commit to addressing teen conception levels. From that summit we adopted an action plan, and I'm pleased to say that everything in that action plan, everything we said we were going to do, has been done. Looking forward to 2018, what we want to do is there's a self-assessment that Public Health England have recently released. We want to do a self-assessment, and that will help us identify where the gaps are. And we're looking at it in East Bedworth and North Warwickshire. We're looking at it collectively. So we're going to take the self-assessment framework, we're going to have a look at it, we're going to identify what we need to do, where the gaps are, what we're good at, and what we're kind of areas that we need to kind of explore. And we'll have our new action plan that the Addressing Teen Conception group will continue to lead on. The good thing about this group is that Public Health England have recognised it as good practice. So it is being cited when they're going to conferences and when they're going around to areas to say, this is what Nuneaton and Bedworth, in partnership with North Warwickshire, have kind of developed and led with. And I think it's kind of credit to this group because that's part of what you've championed for, and is probably a good success story of this scrutiny panel. You'll see that one of the things as well that I've been asked to do by the chair of this group is to kind of look at performance measures. And one of the things that we've adopted is the under 18 conception rate. So you'll see for 2015-16 there was a reduction in teen conception rates from the previous year. In 2014, Nuneaton and Bedworth was the highest in the country, and I'm pleased to say we're not anymore. The new conception rate will come out shortly, and it'll be interesting to see what direction of travel we're going in there. The other thing linked to this, it's quite a significant thing, is about the health store. So are you all familiar with the health store at Hatter's Bays? So health store funding, this time last year, the health store were in a position where they got no money, and in March they were due to kind of shut up shop. So last year we agreed a funding package in partnership with the CCG and Public Health, just for 12 months, with a caveat that we'd look at a longer term funding commitment. This year, we've been able to agree for a further 2 years of funding, so that will bring us up to 2020. So March 2020, the health store provision will continue until that point at least. And the really positive thing about it is that the workers there are that proactive in terms of engagement, and the GPs are getting better at referring people to the health store, that they're actually struggling with capacity to meet the need. So that's another really good, although it's kind of, they're victim of their own success really, it's a really good outcome. So we're hoping that we can continue to support them. Additional services are going in there, pharmacies, we're trying to do some links with pharmacies as well about emergency contraception and that kind of stuff. So that has really been a positive thing this past year that I think we should all be really proud of. If I go on to the next page, you've got the sustainability and transformation plans, and I'm sorry to say there's not really a lot that I can tell you about that. It's something that our portfolio holder, Councillor Longden, has been, you know, chomping at the bit for quite a while. And the last Health and Wellbeing Board, collectively across Warwickshire, members had said how disappointed they were about the lack of kind of transparency around this STP plan. And I think it's probably something that you're all aware of. Yeah.
Has it had another name change? It changed its name to Better Health, Better Care.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. But I think it's in here as the Sustainability and Transformation Plan, because that was what it was called at the beginning of the year. But yes, you're right. It's kind of got a new, I think by name, and it's something different. Yeah.
Rachel, given that this has been going on for 18 months now?
It's December 2016.
And we know that we're going to lose 267 million from Coventry and Warwickshire. But we just can't get any information from them. I mean, it's so frustrating.
I mean, it's even when we're raising the issue at the Health and Wellbeing Board, the chair of the Health and Wellbeing Board is frustrated as well. They had mooted at the last meeting that a partnership group was being set up that would involve district reps, etc. on it. It simply hasn't met. And they had fed that information back to a national body, as in the STP leads had fed it back and said, yes, this group is kind of working and we've met. And Councillor Secom, the chair of the Health and Wellbeing Board, said actually that's incorrect. And she made a representation.
Who said that? Sorry, Rachel. Who said they had met?
There was an STP representative, I can't remember the officer's name, but at the Health and Wellbeing Board, who had said that there had been a partnership group that had met. That partnership group should have involved representatives from, our respective areas. The group hadn't met. Which Izzy Secom said the group hasn't met. It's misleading. So she's taking that issue up with them as well. So we're all in, unfortunately, we are all across the county in pretty much the same position.
We know the axe is going to fall. We just don't know what services it's going to fall on.
I think the thing is, if we were informed and there was a programme of what it was going to look like, the consultation and kind of what the implications are going to be, then fair enough. But at the moment, we've been asking for information since December 2016 that's clear and like, a programme and timetable of what they're going to do and when they're going to do it, and we haven't got it.
Can I make a recommendation?
If it helps before you make that recommendation, Andy Hardy from the Better Care, Better Value, Better Something Else is coming.
We're losing millions, but it's going to be better.
He is coming on the 4th of April to this committee I've also booked him in
Oh.
for the 9th of April in case he cancels again. So, 2 dates in the diary.
Chair, can I make the recommendation? If he can't get here, I'll go out in my car and find him.
Yeah.
Okay, the final point on here, I'd just like to draw to your attention, it's kind of a later addition really to the kind of action plan that we've been working on, is around the Joint Strategic Needs Assessment. So you may or may not be aware that the joint, previously what's called the JSNA used to be thematic, it's now not thematic. The Health and Wellbeing Board have taken a proposal, well it's a reality, not a proposal, to develop it's 22 JSNA kind of profiles. So for Nuneaton and Bedworth, our profile will be led by George Eliot Hospital. They will be the conduit to making that happen. We will obviously be a partner on that, and I believe that the first area that they're going to focus on is going to be Nuneaton Central. So when that's done, we'll be able to bring that back to this board for you to consider. Okay, any questions?
I've got loads, but they're not for you, Rachel. They're for Andy Hardy.
Okay.
If we ever see him, does he exist? Is he a hologram?
So that's the action plan associated with the group. The other thing, if you turn over the page on page 146, in terms of performance indicators, Councillor Shepherd, as chair of the group, has asked us to consider looking at what would be relevant performance indicators, and these are what we kind of agreed in 2017. So you'll see there, just as a kind of a measure, and you know, to focus our kind of our work, we've got the under 18 teen conception rate, we've got excess weight in adults, we've got the percentage of physically active adults and the percentage of physically inactive adults. So these are all taken from Public Health England. The baseline year is there, so this information that I've got was released in 2017, but the most earliest detail and data I can get you is where it says baseline year, so those figures are based on that's the earliest data that's available. So what we're proposing to do, we'll obviously have the baseline year as those, and as time goes forward, we'll just kind of track our progress.
Yeah, just a couple of things. You said there's some more conception data coming very soon.
Yeah.
Is that very, very soon?
It'll be in the new year, it'll be new financial year. I think I kind of want to say it's like May time, May, June time. Be in the first, I'm assuming it would be within the first quarter.
I think it came out last April.
Yeah, I mean, I've got a feeling it's kind of May, June time.
Yeah, because we met over the summer, didn't we?
And second point is, there's nothing on here about sort of mortality rates or life expectancy or something that just sort of says, yeah, I mean, the life expectancy is 80 something, isn't it? For
Yeah, yeah. Yeah.
It'd be useful to have an indicator that says we're actually living longer, or...
But on that, when we were looking at these, we were looking at what we as a council can do. And as a council, we're kind of got limited resources, and we need something to kind of focus what activities we're doing. So in terms of teen conception, we're delivering a piece of work around that, you know, that's been facilitated by this group. And then in terms of the sports development team and the activities that they're doing, you'll see those three kind of areas of work there relate to the work that they're delivering. I mean, there are several. The public health framework has got so many different, it's got hundreds of indicators in there. It's really difficult because actually we could say, well, we could have 19 of those. Yeah. But in terms of what we as this council with limited resources can do, these were what we felt were the best ones.
Yeah, I understand what you're saying there. But Keith's right, as in, if we had, for this borough, if we said the national average is men are dying at 90, women are dying at 100. Yeah. But in this borough, men are dying at 60, women are dying at 65. That alone would send out, or should send out, alarm bells. And it should also, as a borough, make us target things that we can do. Because we already know, and I've just had this conversation with Rachel Robinson, good to finally meet her after all these years, that we're dying of cancer, cardiovascular, obesity. We already know they're the top three, but we don't know the ages. We know that we're dying younger by 13, 17 years, we know that. Steven Spielberg make a great horror movie out of it, but we're not making anybody listen to us because we're not proving it with any stats or ages. It's the ages.
Chris, it's not just age at death, it's age when you become ill.
Yeah, it's your morbidity.
So, yeah, you could live to, say, 80, but you've spent 20 years of that being chronically ill.
And I
So
think
it's that as well.
that's the difference. You've obviously got your life expectancy, but you've also got your life quality of life.
Yeah.
And both of them within the borough, we've got the worst in the county in both of those respects.
We're still not proving it. We prove that we're dying younger, we do that,
Yeah.
but not by how much. Well, we do as in percentage, but we need to know ages and that, and like you say, quality of life.
Okay, that's fine. But as an organiser, so you can know that information. That's fine. For the purposes of this group here, these are the kind of PRs that we've got because they're the areas of work. So, in terms of tracking general PIs around broader, wider determinants of health, there is no reason why the public health outcomes framework overall can't be shared with this meeting. So not necessarily adopting them as a performance indicator for the Corporate Health Champions group, but overall, as a scrutiny, understanding what are the issues, what are the health issues, what is that age gap, what is the, I think it's 18 years I heard at some point you've got between life expectancy of somebody living in Leek Wootton and somebody living in Abbey, adult male. 18 years difference, 9 years for a woman, around that. It's not acceptable. But in relation to the Corporate Health Champions group, what can we do with what we've got? What I'm saying is that there's a difference between kind of monitoring that and being able to have our employees do stuff about it.
But if this panel can get those facts and figures, then we can go out and shout about it, can't we?
So that's fine. That is not a problem at all. I can get that information and you can do what you wish with it, if that would help.
Yeah, please.
I think we need that documentation, them facts, and then we do need, as a panel, need to do something either with county or with National Health England or whatever. But we need to do something about it. It's no good carrying on and saying, oh yeah, because can you remember that meeting I was at county? Yeah, it's historical, Councillor Watkins. It might be historical that we die younger, but what are you doing about it?
Yeah, you're right.
We need it before Andy Hardy comes, don't we?
Yeah.
Okay.
Because he's the guy that's cutting the
I
services.
don't know, I'm not on this panel.
Councillor Ellis.
Thanks. And just going back to the MET meeting, every contact count, which is a really admirable, great concept. I'm just wondering whether any records are kept on when it's been implemented. Just thinking about the workloads of the reduced staff and whether they've actually got time.
Okay. So no, there are no records kept about that. What we have done previously, we've done a review of MEC of how useful it's been, how many, how likely are you to use it? Are there any barriers to your usage? Some of the findings of that, and again they're reiterated in Rachel's report, I think, about people identifying the most appropriate thing to say to somebody, and sometimes it's not appropriate to say, by the way, have you thought about losing some weight? Do you know what I mean? It's not that simple to be able to just have those conversations, and particularly, I think for non-health practitioners, it isn't easy to have that because you're not a health expert. So MEC is designed around giving people kind of a broader range of information. The new MEC, because the old MEC was all about, it was very kind of public health orientated. The new MEC is around kind of giving you tips and techniques of how you could potentially go along that route if it's appropriate. But in answer to your question, we as employees, we don't ask them to measure every time they have a conversation with somebody about their health and well-being, because it's just too unwieldy. They've got their day job, their general day job to do, and MEC is there to equip them should they need to be able to share information.
So you've trained up 124 employees. I went to some fantastic training today, but I'm pretty unsure how they're going to have time to get it out of my bag again. So you need to know whether it is being used. And when I first heard about it, it was from the angle of the Alzheimer's or dementia.
Yeah.
Just handing out a leaflet or something.
Yeah.
Last time I was in the town hall, there was a big queue, and the person on reception was really quite stressed.
Yeah.
Just no time to kind of say, oh, by the way.
Yeah. But if you think of frontline, when I talk about frontline officers, that's about kind of the broader kind of health and stuff. So you've got, if you think about housing officers, the situations and circumstances that they come into, the people that they liaise with. If you think about my team, we're out and about in the community, and you come across people, as an ASB officer, you come across people with mental health issues, who kind of need additional support and help, and we're able to say, well, have you thought of, or can we help you with? So it's not knowing everything there is to know, but it's just about an understanding and awareness that what somebody might be initially presenting to you with, it might not be the full facts, and you might have a little something that you can help them with.
Yeah, okay, fair enough.
I've got Councillor Constable.
No?
Yeah.
No?
No? Councillor Pontus.
Thank you, Chair. I think as well, we're talking, about an incredibly complex situation here. I mean, we just take, for example, things like, we've talked a number of times tonight about healthy eating and diet and so on. Well, being able to eat healthy food. First of all, it's not necessarily cheaper. This one of the myths is that the other sorts of food is actually more expensive. It's not necessarily the case. Yes, okay, far be it from me to say not to teach people to cook, but in order to cook good, healthy food, you need a cooker, and that cooker needs to work. And most of us probably sitting around here that, well, I've got a cooker, but we're talking. The bottom of all this is we're talking about people. We've used the word deprived. We're talking about people who are poor. And I think that for, to say to somebody, as you said, you're not suggesting, and by the way, you could do to lose a little weight.
I would dream of that.
No, I know you were using it as, exactly, but, it is, behind all that, we've got a food industry that is set up purely to make money for the food industry. We're talking about, cutting down levels of salt, cutting down levels of sugar in food. And, we sort of tinker a bit about it. But, I just feel with the, to sort of ask people to sort of talk about these things. There's a whole, it is complex.
At risk of being patronising and...
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
And carbs, of course, often they are the cheapest and most fattening food, aren't they? And they fill you up quickly.
Yes. Fresh fruit is expensive. for example.
But don't forget the food banks and edible links, and there are places that people, if they're struggling, can go to if they need. And that's something else, you know. Whilst it might be about health, it's also about the understanding that there are places, you know, people are hungry, people are struggling, people, you know, need assistance in the broadest sense. It's about an understanding and awareness around, you know, we've got edible links, we've got all sorts of kind of good things within the borough where we can signpost people to, and that's really what MEC is. It's not being judgmental and saying actually blah blah blah. It's about saying, I can see you've got an issue with such and such, or you look like this might be able to help you, and doing it that way.
Right, I was a member. Mrs. Conical, did you want to make any comments?
Well, just on what was just being said there and things, I mean, at the food bank and things, they do actually ask people, you know, have you got some means of cooking or whatever. They don't assume that everyone has a cooker or whatever. And the same when people come to our drop-in that we do at church, and sometimes they come later, and then, we say, well, we've stopped serving and things, yeah. And they say, well, have you got anything we can take? And we would always ask, you know, well, we can give you this, but have you got a means to heat it up, you know, or whatever. You know, so that sort of thing is actually, it's not, no one is ever assuming that people have got means, it is actually being, you know, asked.
I mean, what happens if people say, no, I haven't got a cooker?
Well, then we would give them something like a sandwich to take away or whatever that doesn't need heating. We wouldn't give them or you know, if it's a can of baked beans and things, yes, you can actually eat that cold. But we would actually ask, you know, if we'd go and look to what's in the store cupboard and say, well, we've got this, you know, is this any good to you?
Yeah, Michelle, our church does the same.
Yeah.
Or what we'll do is we'll wrap food up in some foil, try and keep it warm for them, particularly if they're homeless and it's a cold day.
So just to confirm then, are you going to get them stats on the age that people die? Are you going to get them ready for?
Is that what you
Yeah, that's what I'm asking for.
you want?
But then again, it doesn't really matter what I'm asking for, because I'm not on this panel.
Chris, that's actually in the public health, the report they do every year, those stats are actually available for the borough.
Not ages, Michelle.
Yes, they are.
But this needs to be ready. Michelle,
Can we not have a conversation across the... I know you're not on my panel very often, Councillor
but
Watson.
also, it might help to educate the people within the borough. If they know that they're dying at 60 when other people around them are dying at 80, it might help them. We do enough in this borough, really. We have got things where people can go and train outside for free. We've introduced free outdoor gyms. We've got the passport to leisure. We do enough in this borough. Not enough that we shout about, but we do things. But we don't shout about them enough. But we need to tell this guy, when he comes, the facts.
Okay, so just being conscious of when he's come in, which is a week on. Is it 2 weeks?
2 weeks.
2 weeks
Fourth
time.
or the 9th.
No, okay. If I send through, so Public Health England will have, you can go down to kind of the level that you need this from. You can go down to Nuneaton and Bedworth and you can look at those performance indicators. Do you want me to just send the link to you, Shirley, so you can have a look at it?
Yeah, I think I've probably got one. I was just thinking, doesn't the profile,
The JSNA sometimes provides provided info.
we used to get that, we get that profile,
We
don't
do,
we,
yeah,
each year?
Yeah.
And I'm sure that's got a mortality thing on it.
Yeah.
Well, you'd like to think that this guy knows it all, wouldn't you?
Yeah, all the data is available, and a lot of the stuff, we've got multiple copies of these because I get one as a borough and a county councillor. I think the point I was making is it needs to be copied into our document, so it actually says at the moment we are living this long, and then next year we're living either 0.1 year more or 0.1 year, and we'll be going backwards. That's what's really bad, is actually the figures were very, very slowly getting better, and now with the extra cuts and austerity and all sorts of other issues, they're starting to get worse, and that's the red line, that we need to be making a small incremental improvement every year, not a small incremental decline.
And of course the cuts affect the least able people to shoulder them, don't they? The people who are least able to shoulder the cuts,
Anyway, Rachel's
and
getting
people
hungry,
who are
so-
being burdened by them.
So if you can get.
I'll send you what I've got and do with it, you know, do with it what you wish. Any
You want
others?
to do item 10, I believe that's you as well.
That's not me.
That's got your name by it.
No, well, that's because, but afterwards you told me it wasn't mine.
Oh,
The data that was in that report Rachel's just given you, really, the performance indicators. If you look on page 149, it identifies the performance indicators for this panel. And Rachel presented that information within the report that she's just given you. So, you've had it.
Okay, that's fine. The risk register starts at page 151 and goes to page 162. And I'm presuming members have read it. Mrs. Concord, do you want to speak on this item?
I just wanted to sort of draw out, I mean, I haven't had time to read as much as I would have liked. The thing about the freedom of information requests, I think is absolutely horrendous. There are very, very few that have actually seemed to have been done in the timescale that's supposed to be. And there seem to be an inordinate number that are outside and still outstanding after 172 days. I mean, 159 days. I mean, there's no officer here to actually answer to this and things, but I think as a panel you should be extremely alarmed and be asking, you know, someone who can answer the questions to actually attend.
Well, maybe that's the problem, Michelle. Maybe we haven't got somebody who can answer these requests. Maybe they're just
Well,
complicated.
each directorate must, it's got to be responsible, so I mean that's what the director gets paid for. So, you know, the ultimate from each department, director needs to be, you know, account for why these are not done. That's my opinion anyway.
The FOIs that are indicated here are only those ones that haven't been responded to within the time frame. So they're not all the FOIs, they're just the ones we've not responded
But
to.
the number of them.
But yes, but if we had 3,000 of them and that's all we haven't responded to, it wouldn't be so bad. I don't know what the percentage is. The other thing is that those are reported to the directors. So I would assume that the directors are raising those issues of the ones that are really out of date with their staff. I know that my director does with me, so I'm sure the others do too.
Mrs. Concord.
I haven't had a chance to read, so I can't comment on anything else.
Any member?
Is that what we're looking
So
at
on the
now?
list register, 151 to 162, I presume everybody's read it, so if there's any questions on the list register.
I'll just say this goes to all the committees, so the comments I've got actually refer to all the committees, so I've already done them in other places.
There aren't any really that refer to health directly.
Move on to the strategic performance report on 163. Any member?
That's there for members' information, Chair, unless there's something specific that they'd like to raise.
Well, one that is related to obviously health is health and safety risk assessments. That never seem to get a very... You'd have thought that would be the sort of thing we should be at 100% for good performance. A good performance, this is on page 165, a good performance is 80% and we're now doing 68%. So.
Is that compulsory health and safety assessments? Or?
push it forward.
Each section or each team has their own areas where they need to do health and safety assessments, and it's on our AssessNet system. So when the assessment has run out, we have to do it each year. It sends us a prompt to say you need to look at this again. So I'm not quite sure why.
Is it the walkabouts?
No. It's so, for example, if you're a housing officer and you go out and you work alone, there would be a health and safety assessment as to lone working.
Oh, I see.
Or
tripping over wires in the office or something.
And if there's something particular, so if you were working with asbestos, there would be certain particular things that you would need to be aware of, and they would be in that. And so, like for our team, we have been in the council at night, and maybe there's nobody else about and things like, you know. So there's, and so each team has different assessments to do. But as I say, it is an electronic system.
Could it be a time pressure then?
I would imagine that might
fewer
be
and
what it
fewer
is.
people doing more and more. Yeah.
So could you
I can
find
find out.
some more information? I think that'd be useful to say. Because it might be a certain department that's got,
Yes, we don't want
you know, got an
staff
issue with staffing
to
or
suffer,
what
do
like
we?
that. So yeah, it's the ambulance,
Like
a bit more
even if it's
information.
changed office furniture around, you have to do another risk assessment.
Oh.
But I think it's particularly important at time of change. So as we're reorganising, losing staff, doing a new risk assessment after you've done a lot of change is very important. Because otherwise, you've got new people or people with large responsibilities, and you've lost that knowledge of what to do if.
Well, every time we lose a layer of management or a layer of team or whatever, we lose knowledge, don't we? We lose, experience and knowledge.
Thank you, Chair. I've been coming sort of a few years now, and in terms of personal development reviews, it's never reached 100%. I mean, and this one for 2016-2017, it's 76%. So that's a lot of people who aren't actually having a review. And some of the objectives for the council are dependent on staff being trained and having the objectives incorporated into their reviews. So it's important that they have a review, and if 76% have had one, what's happening to the rest of the staff, and will they actually get one next year?
The PDRs, the reviews used to be mandatory. So every year, managers had to do a mandatory review of every member of staff. And that was why we had 100%, and we were trying to get there. That's now changed, and it's no longer mandatory. All that is mandatory is that the manager asks the member of staff if they would like a PDR or a development review. If they would like one, then they will get one. If they say they're not bothered or they don't want one, then they won't. But on a monthly basis, managers should be having one-to-ones with their staff, and the idea is that any issues that would normally be picked up in the personal development reviews should be being picked up on those monthly one-to-ones. So they shouldn't have to wait a year, you know, it's those things should be ongoing. So I think that's just going to get less and less probably, rather than anywhere near 100%.
Just seem an old-fashioned
way
of working, doesn't it?
Okay, could be altered then, somewhere along the way.
this is Cabinet's report, so I'm not in a position to alter it.
Thanks, Chair. I'd just like to make a comment again about the grounds maintenance standards and the comment that the below par performance is the main issue is leaf litter build up on the paths. I think it's
Which page is this?
This is on page 164. I mean, they've consistently underperformed all of the figures that we've had, and I think I made a comment probably a few meetings ago about the brambles in the park, and was told that apparently this is part of the specification by the borough to leave the brambles so that the footballs don't go into the river. The fact that there are no brambles on the side that the children's play area is on, I think actually disputes that. But, you know, when we're trying to get people outside and into the park, and I walk through the park regularly, but, you know, it really is. It doesn't look good, and quite often, is it Glendale, the contractors, are actually in the park with their vans, not doing a lot, should I say. I don't want that minuted, but I think, you know, it can be very attractive. Bedworth Park is very attractive, but Riversley, you know, it used to be beautiful, but it's not now. So I think, how do they account for that below par performance? Who do they account to? I mean, it's 10% below the bottom of the range. Acceptable performance is 65 to 75, and they're only on 55, 56, and they're...
I think that's, Chair, I think that's one of those performance indicators that's a little bit awkward, because it's based on the satisfaction returns that are sent back to us, and we get very few sent back. So that probably, that 58% could equate to 7 people, because that's as few as we get in satisfaction returns. So it's not a very satisfactory performance indicator.
But I understood when counties or issued contracts, then there's a performance monitoring officer on behalf of the county or the city where I worked. So there's somebody that has an expertise that is monitoring that. I mean, I wouldn't, no, I don't know. I think to rely on X number of people to write in and say there's a few brambles, I don't think that's really a very robust performance monitoring technique.
In the good old days, we did used to have a
monitoring officer.
But I think there's 3 left in parks now. I would suggest that if you have got
write in more often now. I haven't written in at all yet, but if that's what it relies upon.
Well, you can go onto the council website and put a custom complaint in. That is the best way to put a complaint in. If you go on to customer complaint, and if you take a photo or something, put it in that way, and they have to respond. That is the very best way you can do it. That's the way I do all my complaints.
But if ever you do get a satisfaction survey come through your door, because we send them out and the contractors put them out, if you ever get one, please fill it in and come and send it back.
I have never seen one. I've never seen one.
So if the concerns of the panel in regards to ground maintenance can be passed back.
That's what happens when you want the lowest common denominator, isn't it?
And as has been said, relating that to health, because we want people out within the parks, so it's like them more attractive.
Wouldn't be like that in Stratford.
Yeah.
Move on to the freedom of information requests and complaints. Any member?
There's nothing relating to health in that.
It's nothing relating to health, but then it should be noted that there's concern over the time scale.
I would just say on both freedom of information and the complaints is we've got a reference number there, so it means nothing to us. So if we could have a bit more information. The information is now gave when you get a reference number on your complaints. When you do a complaint, it will say, for instance, Kingwood Road litter. It would say that, so there's no need why they can't put that on there.
Does it help you though? If you knew it was litter, you then not know where it was, or?
Well, it would, because like, you know, okay, you've got NDCF, whatever, 143 economic development. That could be the Vicarage Street development. So we know the reason behind that. So we know it's 143 days because there's nobody come forward to build on it. But if it's fixing a light, and then there's no reason for it to be 143 days, is there? Yeah. I think you need that information, and there's no reason, because with all that work we went through, that information is there when you make that complaint then.
Yeah. And we've got some spare white space.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That means absolutely nothing.
No.
No, it doesn't. Relay that back.
Even if you punch that in, that would mean nothing.
I don't seem to, I think you're right, Chris, there doesn't seem to be anything relating to health or parks or whatever.
Yeah, because it was agreed to be put on all the performance reports, so it goes to everybody.
I'll move on to the next item, because I know the member. Updates on the sustainable transport plan, better care, better health, better value, now remembered what the other one was. As I said, Andy Hardy is expected to attend this meeting on the 4th of April or the 9th of April, so if you can put both dates in your diary. I've deliberately given 2 dates because he is known to cancel, so at least that way we've got another date in his diary and he might actually come to one of them.
You can still cancel both then.
Yes, so that's why we've gone for 2 days.
You'll
So,
suddenly have a long weekend.
Yeah.
yes, so the 4th or the 9th, obviously.
It is actually Easter week, Chair, isn't it, the 4th?
So you will be here, Margaret? Okay, I'll suffer Margaret.
We're hoping the George Eliot Hospital will come and give their update as well to that meeting, as well as the Warwickshire North CCG, Andrea Green, coming with the stroke services.
The adult social care and health hour, say I've got no updates at this present time. Item 12, the forward plan is in the paperwork for noting.
Sorry, Chair, have you given Andrew and, is it Kathy Kelly that's coming, have you given them the two-day option?
We've given everybody the 2 days.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay, Councillor Constable.
The on forward plan's got the parks and leisure strategy. Is that actually going to happen? It says April. Because obviously parks and leisure is quite tied in with health, particularly the leisure part.
I know that Paul's on holiday at the moment, so I don't know what the situation is.
The work programme items. You notice from the work programme items at the back of your paperwork. Going down, it says. Obviously with the George Eliot update and that leaves about 4 items on the agenda. So we're moving to. We have had another work programme item in terms of keeping health food. Councillor Constable.
Yeah, I mean, we do a lot of stuff there. I mean, this meeting's almost 3 hours long, so I can't see how we cannot have this committee and just merge health in with just all the other scrutiny stuff. And people do take an interest in health, which is why they're on the health committee. So I think we do need to know, or at least discuss where we're going and how we're going to scrutinise, particularly with the SDP going to be in a very active phase, possibly after May.
Chair, I think the plan is to have one chair. They're not going to merge in terms of having just one meeting and reams of issues. I think they'll just merge in terms of there'll just be one person responsible for various.
But will there be two
Yeah,
committees?
that's my
on the chair?
understanding of it.
But this is why we need it on the work.
Yeah.
We need someone
Yeah.
to tell us from the council's management how we're going to scrutinise the massive amount of health stuff, rather than guessing what the plan is. Because if there's one big committee, will it have 20 members on?
No. There'll still be the same committees, but there'll only be one chair for them. So whoever takes on that job is going to have the work cut out.
But why can't you have two committee chairs and pay them half the amount? It's
Yeah.
Well, that'd be something I suggest. But
Any other member?
I don't
I
know.
just do as a
Don't ask me.
I've got no idea how it's working.
I don't know. I said
So can we discuss this at the next meeting as well? Because we do need to know before the next year starts how we're going to run scrutiny. And we don't have the joint whatever committee we used to have. We used to have a committee that discussed what we're going to scrutinise.
I think we just need some clarification, don't we?
Yeah.
Because if it is that this committee is going to remain, but say a chair chairs two different scrutiny panels, that's very different to saying that two committees are going to merge and essentially a committee is going to have twice.
Well, they'll merge in the sense that there'll be one chair for both of them, but they will keep their identities. Is that, I forgot, is that
Well,
right, Shirley?
From my
Do you know?
understanding of what went to council,
I
it
don't
said that
think
there
that's
was
right.
they were going to move from 4 OSPs
Yeah,
to 2.
Which means they'll amalgamate them.
So instead of there being 4, there's only going to be 2. And my understanding from what's been said to me, which is very, very little, is that there was a suggestion that it might be an internal OSP, you know, looking at like the economics, policy and that sort of thing, and an external which would look at health and the various contracts that we have with others and that sort of thing. So that's how they were going to split it.
That's why I understand.
That was what my understanding.
Well, I could be wrong then.
Oh, no,
I could
I-
have got the wrong end of the stick.
Don't
well,
take for what I'm saying. Don't take what
I
I'm
was going to
saying.
say,
Chair, can I move that we express our concern and ask for clarification?
Yes,
that's it.
Yeah.
I second that.
I think that was right. I've got no any other business, so thank you very much for your time.
Chair, just on this discharge protocol, I've been
Yes.
banging on about it for ages. When is this going to come to an end?
It'll come, Kath Kelly will talk about
Can I ask
it.
Kath
The 4th or the
when she
9th,
comes?
depending on which one it is.
It will come to an end.
On the 4th or the 9th,
How about
when she
then?
comes. So she'll speak on
yeah.
Kath Kelly when she comes.
Jill's just given me a copy of the discharge protocol, but it's more to do with discharging to care.
Right.
I've got it there and I'm going to scan it in and then I'll send it out to everybody. So you might want to pick some of that up with Kath when she comes. And that's as much as we've got at the moment.
It just baffles me why we have to keep reinventing the wheel. I mean, I'm sure Florence Nightingale was discharging people in a probably easier manner than we are.
So thank you very much for your time, and if you put both the 4th and the 9th in the diary, it's now confirmed as soon as I know.
Yeah, thanks, Jill.
I just have someone
I'll
to
be
drop out.
Well, I'm telling